Excellences, distingués collègues,
Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, I declare open the 19th meeting of the 60th session of the Human Rights Council. We'll continue our general debate on agenda item 3. We will continue with the list of national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations. I would like to give the floor to the Association of Societies for Sustainable Development.
Association de la Solidarité des
Association of Solidarity with students from both.
English control over the historical homeland of Elam Tamils in northern and eastern provinces of Sri Lanka, which remains largely under military rule despite the end of Sri Lankan genocidal war against Elam Tamils 16 years ago. It is with this intent that it is escalating for an example of the expropriation of land in all Tamil districts located in the north and east of Sri Lanka. Sinhalese colonization and settlements in Tamil lands under the guise of development have been prevalent since the independence of country. They use different methods deployed by the successive governments and military to further disempower of Elam Tamil. There are more than 20 mass graves in Tamil homeland, among them the Chemmani mass grave in Jaffna, where over 240 sets of humans remain, including the remains of children, infants, and bodies found in overlapping positions. In one of the island's largest ever mass graves have been recovered so far, making the Chemmani the 17th officially recorded mass grave in Tamil homeland. The appointment of key former military officials who were part of the Tamil genocide of 2009 continues to challenge the reconciliation efforts, accountability, and human rights. It proves that the government advocates impunity and undermines the efforts of Tamil victims to seek justice. We ask the core group countries on Sri Lanka to send the resolution on SLAP and propose a new resolution under item 4 to appoint a country-specific rapporteur for Sri Lanka under agenda 4 and refer Sri Lanka to the ICC. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to the Sorbonne Center for International Law and International Relations.
Thank you, Chair. The right to development is a fundamental human right. Yet for decades, Tamil people in Sri Lanka have been systematically denied this right. Development in the north and east is militarized, extractive, and imposed without the participation of the communities most affected. A striking example is the Mannar Wind Project. Promoted as a clean energy initiative, it is being implemented without proper consultation or consent of local Tamil fishing communities. Being of that community, for us, it means the loss of livelihoods, destruction and ancestral lands, and further marginalization, not development. This is not an isolated case. Across the Tamil regions, young people face unequal access to higher education, exclusion from government jobs, and limited opportunities for dignified employment. As a result, many are forced to leave their homeland in search of survival, while those who remain live under surveillance and militarization. Mr. President, this month of September also recalls the sacrifice of Tyaga Deepam Thiliban, a 23-year-old Tamil youth who fasted until death in 1987, demanding equality in education, employment, and self-determination. 30 years later, his demands remain unmet. We therefore urge this council to call on Sri Lanka to ensure that development is inclusive, participatory, and non-discriminatory. Guarantee free, prior, and informed consent for all projects affecting Tamil lands and livelihood. We urge this council to consider the appointment of a country-specific special reporter for Sri Lanka so that the situation can be brought under Agenda 4 in line with other country situations of serious concern. Only through such a mandate can victims' voices be heard and accountability meaningfully pursued. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I would like to encourage speakers to take into account the work of our interpreters and try to read your statements at a reasonable pace.
Community empowerment.
Thank you, Mr. President. In India, Tamil Nadu state population approximately 70 million people living, including 40 million women and children. According to Tamil Nadu state recent report, there is a serious failure in the law and order and judicial system. Political leader murder, corruption and illegal activities, honor killings, and many lockup deaths in police station, land encroachment, illegal mining, and more. Crime against women such as attack and rape over the minority community women facing by schools and colleges. There's a huge part of the banned and illegal drugs were involved in the school student and youngsters. The High Court of Madras appointed an IAS officer Officer, Mr. O. Sahayam, to investigate this theft of mineral resources. As the result is 100,000 crore Indian rupees, more than what the government had set in Madurai district. This is a large treasure robbery to have taken place on the Asian continent. Mr. President, Puruchi Tamilagam Parayar Peravai President Mr. Appo Dhanabal Murthy was assaulted in front of the Director General of Police Office. However, the victim was arrested by the police, and the government against on him using the Gundas Act is condemnable. Mr. President, we call upon this United Nations Human Rights Commission to recommend the government of India to warn strictly the ruling government of DMK and the Chief Minister of Mr. M.K. Stalin to maintain the law and order in a proper way and ensure the safety life of the Tamil Nadu people. Or we urge the United Nations Human Rights Council refer to suspend the Dravida Munnetra Kalagam ruling party state government and bring the Tamil Nadu state under the President Region Article 356 of Indian Constitution, or to consent the immediate re-election in the state. Justice for Amsterdam. Jai Bhim. Thank you.
The interpreters would once again like to ask the speakers to speak a reasonable pace.
Orateur à lire.
Yes, I would like to encourage, says the chair, to read at a reasonable speed. I give the floor to the Regional Observatory for Women in Latin America and the Caribbean. They're not in the room. I now turn to Association for Protection of Refugee, Internal Displaced Women and Children videos.
Mr. President, today the world faces the alarming rise of forced displacement, asylum seeking, and refugee caused by armed conflicts, organized population movement, economic and social crisis, and climate changes. From Palestine and Gaza to Afghanistan, Myanmar, Ukraine, and Somalia, economic sanctions, driven by political pressure from developed countries of the North, have exacerbated shortage of natural and financial resources, undermined resilience, and deepened economic and energy imbalance. These pressures severely reduce the capacity of host societies to absorb and integrate refugees, while fueling social tensions that push governments toward restrictive migration asylum policies. In Iran, we host over 6 million forcibly displaced persons from Afghanistan with immense needs in education, healthcare, and livelihood. Yet, for decades, our people have at the same time lived under escalating unilateral coercive measures. Meanwhile, conditions in Afghanistan, particularly under the Taliban's restrictive policies against women, ethnic and religious minorities, and civic activities, remain a major obstacle to voluntary return and reintegration. We therefore call upon the international community to approach these realities with fairness and without political bias. Above all, political consideration must be separated from humanitarian imperatives so that the suffering of vulnerable human beings may truly be alleviated. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Takudu.
Mr. President, since the outbreak of the conflict in April 2023, the Sudanese armed forces and allied militias have carried out systematic violations that target not only civil and political rights, but also economic, social, and cultural rights. These violations undermine the right to development and threaten the human rights system as a whole. Mr. President, Sudan has witnessed a severe breakdown in the protection of civilians and their basic rights, marked by extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, and arbitrary arrests carried out by the Sudanese armed forces and extremist factions, including those led by Mini Minawi and Jibril Ibrahim. The UN Office of the High Commission for Human Rights documented 89 killings in August 2025 and 18 in January 2025 in Khartoum. Systematic attacks on vital infrastructure have deprived millions of Sudanese of essential rights to health, education, housing, and clean water. Mr. President, we urge this Council to condemn these violations, expand the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Sudan, and establish an international mechanism to monitor the conflict's impact on economic and social rights. It's crucial to ensure support for displaced persons, safeguard civil society, and address the humanitarian crisis that now threatens fundamental rights. The Council must act swiftly and decisively to protect human rights in Sudan. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to Association Maona for Human Rights and Immigration. Absent, je passe à United for Human Rights. Absent également, je passe la parole à
I give the floor.
European Forum for Dialogue and Human Rights, Rokan Kapoor. Arab European Forum for Dialogue and Human Rights.
Mr. President, the accelerating digital transformation and the rise of AI represent both one of the greatest opportunities and one of the most pressing challenges for human rights. These technologies provide vast potential to expand access to education, healthcare, and public services, yet they also raise serious risks to privacy, security, non-discrimination, and justice. International reports by the United Nations, UNESCO, and the OECD stress the urgent need for a human rights-based approach guided by ethical governance to prevent digital violations and algorithmic bias. In this regard, the UAE has emerged as a pioneering model for integrating artificial intelligence into national policies while upholding human values and rights. The UAE established the world's first Ministry of Artificial Intelligence in 2017 and launched the National AI Strategy 2031 to promote responsible innovation. It has enacted comprehensive legislation on data protection and privacy, advanced initiatives on AI ethics and fair digital governance, and actively contributed to global discussions on the future of technology and human rights. Mr. President, we urge this esteemed council to harness digital innovation and AI to advance human rights, ensure transparency, privacy, and equitable access, and to support the adoption of a binding international convention regulating these technologies inspired by the UAE's forward-looking vision. Thank you, President.
Merci. Je
Thank you. I give the floor to Village Uni.
Virginie absent.
They are not in the room. Sirid, please.
سيريد للتنديد بانتهاكات الجسيمة لحقوق.
Our organization would like to condemn the violations of human rights as part of the program involving Sahari children. The occupation for 20 years continues in the Sahara. These persons have been deprived of her passport when visiting her family members, and this is an example of how women suffer from the violation of their rights, abusive restrictions. This is a silent drama that is far away from the spotlight. We demand that the Algerian authorities comply with their commitments and put an end to these detentions and be involved in an international investigation. We condemn the conspiracy of Algeria that commits these abuses without any accountability. Approve these condemnations means giving a green light for the continuation of such violations.
For defending victims of terrorism. Absent. Comité national pour le respect.
International Committee for the Respect of the African Charter for Human Rights and Rights of Peoples, absent. Iran Autism Association.
Mr. President, on behalf of the Iran Autism Association, we thankful for the opportunity to speak. Autism is not a deficit of humanity. It is a different expression of it. Yet, autistic persons and their families around the world often face barriers that silence their voices, exclude them from education, employment, and community life, and deny them the dignity of equal participation. We recall the Universal Declaration of Human Rights recognizes the inherent dignity and equal rights of all members of the human family. These words must live not only in text but in practice. From Iran, we bring the voices of families who say inclusion is not charity, it is justice. We call upon this Council and all member states to ensure the persons on the autism spectrum are meaningfully included in decision-making processes that affect their lives, from school to workplace, from local communities to global forums. Mr. President, investing in inclusion is investing in peace, creativity, and shared humanity. We invite all the stakeholders to work together so that every autistic child, youth, and adults can not only survive but thrive. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to International Support for Human Rights.
Mr. President, the World Social Report 2025 by the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs highlights widening social inequality and growing economic injustice. Over 60% of the global population faces economic pressures, while trust in governments and institutions is eroding. The report calls for a new social contract based on fairness in opportunities, comprehensive security, and solidarity. It urges transformative policies to redistribute resources, empower marginalized groups, and strengthen social rights to prevent fragility and instability. In this regard, the UAE has emerged as a leading model. It builds a social protection system, including direct cash transfers, accessible services, and programs such as NAFIS to reinforce economic security. The UAE advanced gender equality by expanding women's participation in the labor market and leadership roles while promoting inclusion of persons with disabilities and vulnerable groups through progressive laws. It also supports projects in more than 100 countries, focusing on education, healthcare, and infrastructure, showing strong commitment to balanced development. Mr. President, we urge this Council to turn the report's recommendations into commitments that ensure equal opportunities, expand protection networks, and balance growth with cohesion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci.
Thank you. The Secretariat informs me that 4 associations that are on the list following the previous statement, I give the floor to the African Green Foundation International.
Mr. President, we draw the Council attention to ongoing human rights violation as detailed in written submission number NGO19. The erase of Sihela indigenous identity and sector geography, resulting from colonial cartographic classification that remain uncorrected to this day. The Sihela nation, descendant of the Yakka, Deva, and Na tribes, are the original custodians of the Dambadiva, a sector land wrongly reassigned to the northern India during the British colonial era. In truth, it was part of the present-day Sri Lanka until 1836. British authorities deliberately altered maps, timelines, and indigenous names, disconnecting millions from their spiritual geography, sacred sites tied to Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, and also Islam were misinterpreted. As a result, entire population have been cut off from the places vital to their faith and identity. This is not merely a historical injustice, it continues to violate cultural rights, religious freedom, and the dignity of indigenous communities today. We urge this Council to establish a truth commission to investigate these colonial distortions and restore the stolen indigenous identity of the Sihela people, also promote the interfaith healing and justice grounded in truth. We respectfully ask the Council to act. Recognitions and restoration are not only overdue, they are essential to the human rights to know one's origin. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. That was the last statement that we're in position to hear. Distinguished colleagues, I understand that some delegation like to exercise their right to reply on statements made under Agenda Item 3. I'd like to remind delegates that in line with the practice of the Council, the right of reply can only be exercised in reaction to statements that were made in the room. The right to reply does not apply to a statement made by a speaker on the podium during the meetings of the Council. This includes the High Commissioner, mandate holders, or any other expert or representative of the subsidiary body of the Council. I would like to now give the floor to the delegate of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. My delegation exercises its right to reply in response to the statement made by North Korea in the interactive dialogue with Working Group on Enforced Disappearances. With regard to the historical issues raised, we believe that all nations and regions must approach their own history with humility and sincerity. Japan has consistently done so, and our post-war path as a peaceful nation stands as testament to this commitment. For the past 80 years, since the end of World War II, Japan has upheld the principles of democracy and respect for human rights, contributing to the peace and prosperity of the Asia-Pacific region and the international community as a whole. The claims cited by the North Korean in relation to Japan are baseless and factually incorrect. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Cyprus.
Mr. Vice President, Cyprus exercises its right of reply to categorically reject the statement by Turkey during the interactive dialogue with the Working Group on Enforced Disappearances, which seeks to portray its subordinate regime as a legitimate authority. This claim is not only factually incorrect, but stands in direct violation of international law and the relevant Security Council resolutions, notably Resolutions 541 of 1983 and 550 of 1984, which explicitly condemn the unilateral declaration of independence and call upon all states to refrain from its recognition. We also reject Turkey's attempt to whitewash its responsibility as the occupying power in northern Cyprus. The division of Cyprus is the result of Turkey's illegal military invasion and continued occupation of the northern part of the island since 1974. Attempts to legitimize this occupation through unilateral actions are unacceptable and counterproductive to the efforts for a peaceful solution. The European Court of Human Rights ruled that Turkey exercises effective control over the northern part of Cyprus through its military presence and is therefore accountable for human rights violations committed by its own agents and the subordinate local administration. We call on Turkey to provide the Committee on Missing Persons with all relevant information, especially from military archives, on the fate of those persons who disappeared while in its custody or control, including information on burial sites and the deliberate relocation of remains. Turkey must ensure that the Committee on Missing Persons has immediate and unhindered access to all military areas in the occupied part. This is a humanitarian issue that transcends politics and demands urgent attention. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Delegation condemns and categorically rejects arrogant allegations by Japan as a great political provocation for despicable purposes. The abduction issue claimed by Japan has already been completely resolved. Nevertheless, Japan's continued clamor of the abduction issue is nothing but a scheme to evade its responsibility for past war crimes. As attested by history, Japan is war criminal state on worst record, which includes forcibly drafting more than 8.4 million Koreans and forcing 200,000 Korean women into sexual slaves for Imperial Japanese Army, which most of their whereabouts are unknown. We strongly urge Japan to take concrete measures to hold state responsibility through poignant remorse, sincere apology, and legal reparations for heinous war crimes against humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Turkey.
Mr. Vice President, we note with concern and reject the groundless allegations made regarding the ongoing judicial process in the Turkish Cypriot side. These claims do not reflect the legal facts and appears to target a misleading impression within the international community. The competent authority on this matter is the Turkish Cypriot judiciary. Proceedings are being conducted fully in line with the principles of judicial independence and the rule of law as guaranteed under the Turkish Cypriot constitution. The system ensures equal treatment and the right to a fair trial for all, regardless of nationality. In this context, it is worth recalling that the Turkish Cypriot side has established the Immovable Property Commission, recognized by the European Court of Human Rights as an effective domestic remedy for addressing property issues of Greek Cypriots. Unfortunately, no parallel mechanism has been established by the Greek Cypriot side to address the long-standing property claims of Turkish Cypriots. We therefore call for an honest and constructive approach that avoids politicization and abuse of legal matters and respects the independence of judicial processes in the Turkish Cypriot side. Mr. Vice President, in 1974, when Greece and its collaborator, Greek Cypriots, made a final attempt in the wake of a coup d'etat for the total extermination of the Turkish Cypriot people in the island, Turkey's timely intervention in the island, in accordance with her rights and obligations under the 1960 Treaty of Guarantee, saved the lives of Turkish Cypriots. It is very important to recall the dramatic statement made before the Security Council on 19 July 1974 by Archbishop Makarios, the Greek Cypriot leader at that time, in which he openly accused Greece, not Turkey, of invading and occupying Cyprus. Finally, I would like to remind once again that the only occupation on the island is the assertion of the 1960 partnership state by the Greek Cypriot side through force of arms and its transformation into a Greek Cypriot state. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Armenia.
Mr. Vice President, Armenia exercises its right of reply to the statement delivered by delegation of Azerbaijan under ID with the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. It is regrettable that Azerbaijan focuses exclusively on the opinion of the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention while overlooking the broader findings and concerns reflected by numerous other special procedures. We hope that the other reports will likewise be taken into account with the same level of attention and scrutiny. We underscore that any sustainable peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan must comprehensively address all outstanding human rights and humanitarian issues. In this regard, we echo the statement made by the High Commissioner Volker Turk during the 58th session of the Human Rights Council, where he unequivocally stated that, quote, all those arbitrarily detained in Azerbaijan, including ethnic Armenians, must be released immediately, unquote. Peace and stability in the region remains a top priority for the government of Armenia. We reiterate our commitment to advancing the normalization process in which addressing the humanitarian issues related to POWs, missing persons, and enforced disappearances should become a shared priority. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Sudan.
Merci, Monsieur le Vice-président. Le Soudan
Thank you very much, President. I'd like to exercise right of reply in light of the allegations made by the organization Sustainable Development Enablement related to the accusation according to which that the Sudanese armed forces are using mercenaries in their fighting against the rebels that are supported by countries from the region. And in face of a silence from the international community, Sudan categorically rejects the allegations made by these organizations, and we affirm that these are lies that do not have any foundation. Sudan is committed to the promotion and protection of human rights in line with its international commitments. And what was presented here does not in any way reflect the real situation on the ground. The organization has been referring to certain tribes, Sudanese tribes. Now, how can they be qualified as mercenaries in their own country? Sudan would like to also stress that organizations that launch such allegations only are seeking to politicize questions related to human rights, and they serve these specific agendas, something that runs counter to the principle of objectivity, impartiality that should reign here in this council.
جمعية تنمية المجتمع المحلي بجزيرة
regarding the alleged use of force by the Sudanese forces, this is groundless and we reject it categorically. There have been previous incidents in the past in which we have been fully committed to our international obligation, transparency, and cooperation regarding the said organization that has accused our authorities of committing human rights violations. We repeat that these are groundless. They are fabricated attempts to distort our image and the role exerted by our authorities to protect our people in accordance with international standards. These are paid organizations that lack objectivity on which this council is based. The Sudan will continue working constructively with relevant human rights council bodies and being committed to human rights.
Thank you. I call on Lithuania.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Thank you, Mr. Vice. My delegation exercises its right of reply in response to the statement made by the delegation of Belarus during the interactive dialogue with the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. The Belarusian authorities have forcibly displaced residents of Belarus to the territories of neighboring Lithuania and other states without grounds permitted under international law. This displacement, which is deportation, has occurred through various underlying acts, including through expulsion, coercive measures, and other related crimes, all perpetrated on political grounds. The deportation was a key goal of the Belarusian leadership's campaign to get rid itself by any means of all critics and opponents in order to consolidate the authoritarian hold on power. Lithuania has provided safety measures to the Belarusian people with whom we share close bonds. However, we regularly observe the attempts by Belarusian authorities to carry out attacks and other acts of transnational repressions against opposition members, journalists, civil society, and activists residing in Lithuania with the aim of silencing and curbing their activities abroad. To safeguard national security, prevent acts of transnational repressions, and counter hostile activities by individuals associated with the Belarusian authorities, Lithuanian institutions have established a coordinated mechanism for granting humanitarian residence permits with security services, police, and other relevant institutions involved. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on Thailand.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Once again, Thailand is compelled to exercise our right of reply to the bilateral issue raised by Cambodia, which is a distorted, groundless, and false accusation. The arrest and detention of Cambodian soldiers occurred during the renewed hostilities initiated by Cambodia after the ceasefire agreement was reached. All Cambodian prisoners of war have been taken care of by the Thai authorities in accordance with the international humanitarian law and established humanitarian practices of the ICRC. That detention is not a form of punishment, but rather to prevent them from being forced to re-engage in the conflict. They can be released and repatriated at the cessation of active hostilities. The detention of Cambodian POWs, therefore, does not constitute a violation of either the ceasefire agreement or international law on arbitrary arrest and detention. Thailand reassures the safety and humane treatment in compliance with international humanitarian and human rights law, including the CAT Convention. According to the Cambodian's press release on 10 September, the Secretary of State of Cambodia stated that the ICRC has informed him of the 18 Cambodian POWs are safe and in good health. We urge Cambodia to respect and comply with other articles of the Geneva Conventions, especially on the indiscriminate attacks against hospitals, medical personnel, civilian infrastructures, which are of grave concern. Thailand calls on Cambodia to also respect the first Geneva Convention by immediately recovering the bodies of their fallen soldiers and treating them with respect, honor, and dignity, as well as to inform their respective families of their fate and whereabouts in line with the ICPPED. On the allegation regarding the Pravihan temple, the closest site of attacks is located approximately 2 kilometers from the temple. The temple also lies entirely outside the trajectory of the Thai military operations. It is impossible that gunfire exchange would breach and cause damage to the temple. In addition, this is not the forum for raising cultural landmark issues. Any allegation and accusation should be evidence-based. We call on Cambodia to cease spreading disinformation in all channels, including in this council. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on China.
The UK, PEN, and a few NGOs made erroneous remarks, smearing and vilifying China over issues of Hong Kong and Tibet. China expresses its strong dissatisfaction with and affirmed opposition to them. Hong Kong is governed by the rule of law, whereby laws must be enforced, violations prosecuted. Jimmy Lai is a known instigator and mastermind of anti-China unrest in Hong Kong. His collusion with external forces and incitement to secession are well documented. The Hong Kong courts handled his case impartially and take firm action against the threats to national security. This is a legitimate effort to uphold judicial integrity and protect national security. Certain countries, including UK, apply hypocritical double standards and spread false claims about arbitrary detention of human rights defenders. Their attempts to exonerate and glorify Jimmy Lai and to interfere with Hong Kong's judicial process run counter seriously to the spirit of rule of law and international norms. Shi Ping or Seki Hei, for his personal gain, has sold his loyalty to anti-China hostile forces by wantonly smearing and attacking China, grossly interfering in China's internal affairs and undermining China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. China's countermeasures against him are an act of justice based on Chinese laws, Chinese national interests, and international practice. Chinese citizens enjoy freedom of religion and belief under the law. The government's handling of Falun Gong issue is fully in accordance with the law, aimed at protecting citizens' basic rights and freedoms while upholding the constitution and the legal system. There's no such thing as the so-called religious persecution in China. In Tibet, law for religious activities are well protected. The religious needs of believers are fully met. However, criminal activities must be dealt with in accordance with the law. No one, regardless of his or her background or religious belief, is above the law. Throughout the investigations and trials, the due process rights of defendants and their legal counsel are fully safeguarded. Claims of arbitrary detention or transnational repression are entirely false. China once again urges countries concerned and NGOs concerned to face reality, stop shielding anti-China elements from Hong Kong, and cease interference in Hong Kong Tibetan affairs, which are China's internal affairs. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Greece has the floor.
Mr. Vice President, Greece would like to exercise its right of reply to the statement delivered by the delegation of Turkey. We categorically reject all claims and false allegations made by Turkey. The illegal Turkish invasion of 1974 violated and continues to violate the most fundamental rules and principles of international law. This act resulted in the ongoing unlawful occupation of 1/3 of Cyprus and the forced displacement of the vast majority of the Greek Cypriot population from their ancestral homes. Regrettably, more than 50 years on, Cyprus still endures the grave consequences of this occupation in the northern part of the island. No matter how Turkey attempts to label or portray this situation, the inescapable reality is that it remains an occupation. Any attempt to justify or conceal this reality stands in clear contradiction to the framework established by the UN Security Council, most notably Resolutions 541 of 1983 and 550 of 1984, and undermines efforts toward a peaceful resolution. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I've received information that the distinguished representative of Japan would like to exercise his second right of reply. You have 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. My delegation would like to exercise the second right to reply to the statement made by North Korea. While I will not repeat the details here, but we have to say again that the claims and figures that North Korea mentioned regarding Japan are groundless and based on factual errors. In particular, the term sexual slaves in reference to comfort women is factually incorrect and therefore should not be used. Japan has humbly accepted the historical facts and has sincerely addressed various issues over the 80 years since the end of World War II. Next year will mark the 70th anniversary of Japan's accession to the United Nations. Over the decades, Japan has made consistent and proactive contributions to international peace and security. Mr. Vice President, the claims by North Korea on the issue of abduction are based on erroneous recognition. The families of the victims are now well advanced in age, and some of them have passed away. There is no time to lose before we resolve the abduction issue. Japan strongly urges North Korea to return all the abductees to their homes immediately. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Before I give the floor to the next speaker, I would like to ask all delegations to address human rights issues and at the same time respecting the rules established by the United Nations, including the United Nations Charter. Having said that, I would now like to give the floor to Cyprus.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Cyprus would like to exercise its right of a second reply with regards to the statement made by Turkey. We reject the allegations put forward by the delegation of Turkey, and its ongoing occupation of the northern part of Cyprus constitutes a blatant violation of international law, relevant Security Council resolutions, and binding international agreements. The occupation continues to undermine the human rights of all Cypriots, Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots. As the occupying power, Turkey bears full legal responsibility for the human rights violations committed in the areas under its effective control. And the so-called isolation of the Turkish Cypriot community is the result of Turkey's occupation of Cyprus. The international community is in no doubt, and there is no reason to rewrite history nor international law. Let me also add that in situations of occupation, such as that of Cyprus, the risk of arbitrary detention is exacerbated. This incident with the 5 Cypriots forms part of a long pattern of arbitrary arrest and detentions for which Turkey has been repeatedly found in violation of the European Convention on Human Rights. Cyprus reiterates its urgent call for the immediate and unconditional release of all 5 individuals arbitrarily detained and their safe return to their homes. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The DPRK delegation would like to exercise its second right of reply to allegation made by Japan. Japan is the only criminal state that horribly violates the dignity of fundamental rights of hundreds of thousands of women, including teenage girls, to the battlefields as sexual slaves. There is only one country in the world which organized and managed the sexual slavery system by means of state power and has persistently denied such crimes against humanity without any investigation and punishment for about 80 years. It is none other than Japan. Japan can never evade its historical and legal and moral responsibility for its war crimes by whatsoever. We strongly urge once again Japan to take concrete measures to hold state responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Azerbaijan.
We regret that the delegation of Armenia deliberately attempts to manipulate international mechanisms and abuse legal procedures, demonstrating a clear disregard for international bodies and mandate holders. We categorically reject Armenia's attempt to distort process of administration of justice in Azerbaijan regarding Armenians complicit in criminal acts committed during Armenia's military aggression against my country. We reiterate that there are no arbitrarily detained individuals or prisoners of war in Azerbaijan. In this regard, we recall that the opinion of the working group reaffirms Azerbaijan's right and obligation under international law to prosecute and hold accountable individuals responsible for international crimes committed on its territory. Azerbaijan will continue to take all necessary measures to investigate and prosecute grave violations of international humanitarian law committed on its territory with the aim of fully ensuring justice and accountability in line with its national legislation and international obligations. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I would like to know if any other delegation would like to take the floor.
Turquie a la parole.
Turkey, you have the floor.
Turquie, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I would like to recall once again that the only occupation in Cyprus is the occupation of the government of the once partnership Republic of Cyprus by the Greek Cypriot side through force of arms. None of the United Nations Security Council resolutions on Cyprus have ever referred to the legitimate and rightful Turkish intervention as invasion or subsequent presence of the Turkish troops to deter further Greek Cypriot atrocities on the island as occupation. The presence of the Turkish peace forces prevents the recurrence of violence on the island. Mr. Vice President, the Turkish Cypriot people are still subjected to gross human rights violations under restrictions and are denied of their rightful representation and participation in meetings, activities, and events held by international organizations, including here in this very relevant forum of the United Nations, which is mandated to promote and protect the human rights of all the peoples in the world. In this respect, we are calling upon the international community to reaffirm the inherent rights of sovereign equality and equal international status of the Turkish Cypriot people so that they can take their rightful place on international platform. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, I hereby declare open item 4 of the agenda entitled Human Rights Situations Requiring the Council's Attention. We're now going to start the interactive dialogue with a group of independent experts on the human rights situation in Belarus. It's my pleasure to welcome the members of the independent group of experts. Ms. Karina Moskalenko, who is the chair, Ms. Suzanne Basili, and Ms. Monika Stanislawa Płatek. I would like to give the floor to Ms. Karina Moskalenko, who is the chair of the group of independent experts on Belarus, to provide us with an oral update. Madam, you have the floor.
Monsieur Vice President, distinguished delegates, I'm grateful for the opportunity to address the Human Rights Council today, together with Dr. Susan Basile and Professor Monika Płatek. Our group is pleased to present a conference room paper on accountability, detailing options to counter the deeply ingrained culture of impunity in Belarus. These options reflect the aspirations of Belarusian citizens who have shared their vision with us for a lasting transition grounded in justice. We are privileged to be their voice. This thematic report was prepared in accordance with our mandate to recommend accountability measures aimed at ending impunity, addressing its root causes, and ensuring justice, effective remedies, and reparations for victims. At a time when international law faces extraordinary challenges, we believe that this report places any prospect of accountability in Belarus within existing international and national legal framework. Mr. Vice President, since the 1st of May 2020, as we have repeatedly reported to this Council, thousands of Belarusians have been arrested and arbitrarily detained for exercising their rights to freedom of expression, opinion, assembly, and association. Many have been subjected to torture and ill treatment during arrest and in detention facilities, and hundreds of thousands more have been forced into exile. We have determined that some of these violations constitute crimes against humanity, specifically political persecution and imprisonment. While the recent release of Sergei Tikhanovsky and other political prisoners after years of their arbitrary detention is welcome, it does not change today's reality. Serious violations and crimes that began at the run-up to the 2020 presidential election continue. Belarusians are entitled to expect that their state will meet its obligations under international law to hold perpetrators accountable. Yet Belarus has shown both an inability and unwillingness to investigate or prosecute international crimes. Since May 2020, there have been no genuine investigation or disciplinary proceedings against alleged perpetrators. On the contrary, officials allegedly implicated in gross violations have been promoted and even celebrated. At the center of this culture of impunity stands the president of Belarus. Based on 4 years of victim and witness testimony, defectors' accounts, and extensive documentation, we have reasonable grounds to believe that President Lukashenko, along with other senior officials identified in our paper, established and implemented a policy to suppress dissent and maintain power in 2020. He exploited the state apparatus to preserve his authority and played a significant role in perpetrating these violations and crimes. With no credible prospect of accountability within Belarus, victims are turning to international community for responses. Domestic courts cannot offer reliable redress. However, states have acted through referrals to International Criminal Court, domestic investigations, diplomatic efforts, and targeted sanctions. Our paper also considers several additional avenues, such as interstate litigation before the International Court of Justice to establish responsibility for violating the Convention Against Torture. However, judicial measures alone are insufficient. Any effort to combat impunity must also guarantee victims' rights to truth, reparation, and assurance of non-recurrence. As detailed in our paper, comprehensive strategies are required to dismantle the system of repression and create a movement towards justice. Given the gravity of our findings, we strongly recommend that no business enterprise operating in Belarus maintain financial or economic ties with members of the security forces or with companies owned or controlled by them. This is especially critical regarding private military and security companies active in Belarus. Mr. Vice President, distinguished delegates, our group will continue to serve as a platform for truth and accountability for the victims in Belarus. We count on this council to join our efforts and shared purpose, ending impunity for perpetrators of human rights violations and international crimes in Belarus. Let me now speak in Russian. Уважаемые
Dear sirs, our expert group, established by the Human Rights Council and endowed with an independent status, has repeatedly invited the Belarusian authorities to enter into a dialogue with the group in all letters, requests, and here in this hall. We recommended that they present to us their position and their arguments, but they have yet to respond. Their main argument is that what we do is an alleged interference in the internal affairs of Belarus. But with these ideas, you gentlemen are hopelessly late. In the 21st century, a person should not be defenseless against the arbitrary acts of the authorities, and the authorities cannot trample on human rights with impunity. Let me remind you that we are here in the Human Rights Council. Humanity has long developed minimum standards for the observance of human rights. The state conducts its policy independently without interference from the outside, but the world community has the right and it has the duty to assess gross deviations from the agreements signed by the country in the field of human rights. Thank you very much for your attention.
Merci.
Thank you. Pursuant to our habitual practice, we will now listen to the delegation of the country concerned. So I will give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belarus. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I will start by reiterating the position of Belarus that we do not recognize any of the country mandates established in the HRC at the initiative of a group of countries in relation to my countries. Neither the sole group of experts nor the special rapporteur cannot be regarded as mechanisms for international cooperation in the field of human rights, something that the Council should be dealing with. The purpose of all of these entities is to regularly denigrate my country in order to justify the policy of political pressure and economic sanctions by the European Union and a number of other countries against Belarus following their geopolitical objectives. The documents fabricated by the group are an irresponsible compilation of fictitious documents and manipulation of facts that have been arranged and include biased assessments, the production of which costs mind-boggling funds. The methods of pressure and sanctions that a group of Western countries, these countries fund this show in the Council, if I may put it that way, and pay for the so-called investigations. The methods of pressure and sanctions that a group of Western countries have been trying to apply to Belarus for 30 years, that simply does not work. And I call on the sponsors of the country mandate on the situation of human rights in Belarus to stop adding fuel to the fire of confrontation and fruitless polemics, which annually devour the resources of the UN, the resources of your countries, instead of resolving the real problems of people. For the people of Belarus, sovereignty and independence are of absolute value. We insist on our right, protected by the UN Charter, to independently determine the path of development of the Belarusian state and to form our foreign and domestic policy. Belarus has been and remains a responsible member of the international community. We're interested in intergovernmental dialogue to continue our dialogue with human rights organizations, and we are ready to accept the justified criticism and to work to maximize the implementation of international human rights standards within the framework of universally agreed approaches and not in the arbitrary sense of an order based on someone rules. Despite the continuing imbalances in the work of the Council in favor of non-consensual country mandates, we believe that the Human Rights Council has a constructive potential and states are interested in cooperating on the basis of an equal and equal dialogue that is mutually respectful without politicization and attempts to impose on all countries one narrow template that denies national context. Any other approach destroys multilateralism and will increase the practice of non-cooperation of governments with mechanisms that are inherently politically motivated and programmed to exert pressure, but in fact they simply exploit the issue of human rights. I would like to stress that most non-Western countries have abstained from participating in such meetings. The monologue of a group of countries and of its founders demonstrate the futility of this format of work here in the Council. Thank you.
Merci. Je voudrais, Excellence,
Thank you, Excellencies. I'd like to inform you that the list of speakers has now been closed. I would now like to call on interested delegations to ask questions and make comments on the oral update. Speaking time is 1 minute and 30 seconds for all. I call first of all Mr. Kęstutis Bordis, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, who's going to speak on behalf of a group of countries by video.
Thank you, Mr. President. I deliver this statement on behalf of the Nordic Baltic states. We remain deeply troubled by the deteriorating human rights situation in Belarus, the systematic eradication of civil society, politically motivated sentences leading to degrading conditions of detention, and the systematic use of torture, including sexual and gender-based violence. Legislative changes aim to eliminate any potential dissent and enable misuse of the justice system for political purposes. Hundreds of NGOs are closed as arbitrary arrests and persecutions of journalists, human rights and defenders, and activists continue. With over 1,000 political prisoners in Belarus, the cycle of releases and arrests persists. Only sustained international pressure, non-recognition, isolation, and sanctions can break this. We condemn these authoritarian practices, some of which may amount to crimes against humanity, and demand an immediate and unconditional release and effective rehabilitation of all political prisoners. We urge Belarus to cease immediately the instrumentalization of migrants for political purposes, pushing them into the EU. Identification and prosecution of perpetrators of these crimes, human rights violations, and abuses is essential to ending Belarus' impunity. We repeatedly call on Belarus to cease its involvement in Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine and its complicity in the unlawful deportation of Ukrainian children. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the European Union.
Mr. Vice President, the EU thanks the group of independent experts and expresses its strong support. We strongly condemn the ongoing gross, systematic and widespread human rights violations, some of which may amount to crimes against humanity, and the closed civic space. The EU supports all efforts to ensure accountability and victims' rights. The EU calls for accountability for all cases of ill treatment, torture, sexual and gender-based violence, and appalling detention conditions that may have led to deaths in custody. While we welcome recent releases of political prisoners, we recognize that arrests and re-arrests continue. Therefore, we urge for unconditional release and rehabilitation of all political prisoners. The EU stresses the obligation to uphold their rights and to safeguard their human dignity. The EU continues to urge the Belarusian authorities to abolish the death penalty, to halt their internal and transnational repression, to cooperate with human rights monitoring mechanisms, and to respect its obligations under international humanitarian and human rights law. We urge the Belarusian authorities to stop their involvement in Russia's war of aggression, to immediately ensure the safe return of all unlawfully deported Ukrainian children, and to halt the instrumentalization of migrants in complicity with Russia. Independent experts, what further possibilities do you see for the international community in addressing the lack of accountability in Belarus? Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Kingdom of the Netherlands on behalf of a group of countries.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of Belgium, Luxembourg, and my own country, the Kingdom of the Netherlands. We align ourselves with the EU statement. We thank the group of independent experts for their comprehensive and thorough report. Its conclusions are stark. Since 2020, the Belarusian authorities have pursued a deliberate and coordinated campaign of repression. Peaceful citizens, human rights defenders, and democratic voices have faced arbitrary detention, torture, and systematic persecution. We are appalled by the persistent use of torture, arbitrary detention, and sham trials, targeting civil society, independent voices, and ordinary Belarusians exercising their fundamental rights. Instead of upholding justice, the authorities have turned Belarus's institutions into instruments of oppression, including the persistent and growing practice of transnational repression. Victims are silenced, lawyers are harassed, while perpetrators are shielded from any type of accountability. Impunity has become entrenched. Even if prisoners were released, many more remain unjustly imprisoned. We reiterate our call for genuine accountability and for the immediate and unconditional release of all political prisoners and their effective rehabilitation, and urge the Belarusian authorities to end their campaign of repression. As such, we especially welcome the group's mapping of avenues for justice. Independent experts, could you elaborate on how the international community can most effectively support Belarusian victims' right to truth, justice, and reparation?
Thank you. I give the floor to Poland.
Mr. President, independent experts, Poland aligns itself with the statement of the European Union. We thank the group for the update as well as the paper you presented. Poland fully supports your work. The violent campaign of repression launched by the Belarusian regime in the lead-up to sham presidential elections in 2020 continues to this day. Counter-terrorism and anti-extremist legislation have been misused to persecute political opponents, civil society, and the media. The country's legal profession has also been targeted. Lawyers speaking out against human rights violations face harassment. The judiciary in Belarus is an instrument of repression, issuing politically motivated verdicts in violation of fair trial guarantees. We acknowledge the recent release of 52 prisoners as part of a deal brokered by the United States, as well as the pardon of 25 individuals, including political prisoners, on the eve of National Unity Day. The accounts of torture and abuse they endured while in detention are deeply disturbing. At the same time, we call on Belarus to free at least 1,100 individuals who remain arbitrarily detained. The pervasive culture of impunity for the perpetrators of the human rights violations in Belarus must end. Finally, we urge Belarus to end its involvement in Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine and cease all hybrid attacks against its neighbors, including my own country, Poland. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Albania has the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Vice-Président. Nous remercions le groupe.
Thank you, President. We thank the group of experts for the in-depth report that highlights the systemic and serious generalized violation of human rights that affect the entire society of Belarus. Albania is deeply concerned by the continued practice of arbitrary detention, torture, secret detentions, and unfair trials that represent, according to the group, crimes against humanity. We condemn the violations of human rights, and those responsible should be brought to justice. Political repression continues. Opposition groups are banned. Despite the recent liberation of some political prisoners by Belarus, well armed by the detention of more than 1,200 political prisoners, we reiterate our demand for the immediate, unconditional release of all political prisoners in the country. The civic and cultural space is shrinking, and the media are silenced, and we praise the efforts of the civil society in Belarus despite the risks that they face. Continue to call for justice. Finally, Albania calls for continued close monitoring of the situation, but we should use every tool possible to put an end to impunity. Thank you. Thank you. I give the floor to Ukraine.
We thank the group of independent experts on Belarus for their report. Ukraine deems unacceptable the ongoing violence and repression by the Belarusian authorities against their own people. Belarusians continue to face arbitrary arrests and detentions simply for exercising their fundamental freedoms of expression, opinion, assembly, and association. Those responsible for gross violations enjoy impunity shielded by corruption and loyalist networks that sustain Alexander Lukashenko's repressive rule. The situation is further aggravated by Belarus' complicity in Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Since 2022, Lukashenko has provided the Russian occupiers with the territory of Belarus and its airspace to attack our state, and also continues political, military, informational, and other types of support for Russia in its unprovoked and criminal war of aggression against Ukraine. The close cooperation between Moscow and Minsk poses a direct threat not only to the fundamental rights of Ukrainians, but also to the security of Poland, the Baltic states, and all of Europe, as demonstrated by the recent incursion of Russian drones into territory of the European Union. We would like to welcome the recent release of 52 political prisoners facilitated through US mediation. Nevertheless, we urge the immediate and unconditional release of all political prisoners in Belarus. Thank you.
Merci. La parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Republic of Moldova. Mr. Vice President, we thank the group of independent experts on the situation of human rights in Belarus for their presentation. We echo the concerns over the reported deteriorating human rights situation in the country. All fundamental rights, including freedom of expression, assembly, and association, must be guaranteed and respected. Continued repression against civil society remains a cause of further concern. The report by UN experts on alleged ill treatment and torture of prisoners convicted on terrorism and extremism related charges are equally disturbing. We join their call for prompt, efficient, and impartial investigations. Republic of Moldova welcomes the release of several political prisoners, including the 52 people released the last week. We encourage further efforts to secure future releases, and we hope and call for the release of all those detained on political charges. We also appeal on the Belarusian authorities to meaningfully and fully cooperate with international and regional human rights bodies. Mr. Vice President, let me reiterate our call on Belarus to stop any support to Russia's unprovoked and illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. Distinguished experts, what can the international community do further encourage the release of individuals detained on political grounds? Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to Czechia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Czechia aligns itself with the EU statement. We welcome the recent release of political prisoners, including Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty journalist Ihar Losik, though it came at a considerable cost. Czechia remains gravely concerned about ongoing systemic repression in Belarus and is documented in the latest report and the 1,168 political prisoners still in detention. We are alarmed by the widespread use of in absentia trials, indefinite prison extensions, incommunicado detentions, and other acts of ill treatment that likely amount to crimes against humanity. We urge Belarus to immediately release and rehabilitate all political prisoners, including independent journalists such as Ihar Ilyash and Katsiarina Andreeva. Arbitrary arrest and misuse of anti-extremist laws to silence dissent must end. Targeting of journalists, lawyers, human rights defenders, and LGBTQI+ persons must stop. Belarus must comply with its international human rights obligation and ensure detainees are treated with dignity, have access to legal counsel and medical care, and are protected from torture. Independent experts, how can we ensure recent goodwill gestures are sustained? And what are the prospects for accountability for past crimes? I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to Malta.
Thank you, Vice President. Malta aligns itself with the EU statement, and we thank the group of independent experts for their oral update. We remain deeply concerned about the persistent and systematic deterioration of the human rights situation in Belarus. The relentless repression of fundamental freedoms, including freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly, continues unabated. We strongly condemn these violations and urge the Belarusian authorities to fully cooperate with international human rights mechanisms and to take immediate steps to restore these rights and engage in an inclusive national dialogue. We welcome the recent release of political prisoners from arbitrary detention. Nevertheless, we reiterate our call for the immediate and unconditional release of all those who remain arbitrarily detained on political grounds without delay. Malta also calls for the end of the active involvement of Belarus in Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, including its role in the unlawful deportation of Ukrainian children. These actions constitute grave breaches of international law and must cease immediately. Finally, we urge the Belarusian authorities to abolish the death penalty and, as a first step, establish a moratorium. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to Bulgaria.
Mr. Vice President, Bulgaria aligns with the EU statement. We welcome the report of the independent group of experts on the situation of human rights in Belarus, and we reiterate our support for its work. Bulgaria remains deeply concerned by the ongoing systematic violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the country. In particular, we are alarmed by the continuing shrinking of civic space and limitations on the freedom of speech and peaceful assembly, the repression of critical voices, and politically motivated arrests. We continue to call on Belarus to respect fundamental freedoms and human rights and comply with the obligations under international law and international human rights law. We acknowledge the recent release of political prisoners, and we call on the Belarusian authorities to unconditionally release and rehabilitate all remaining political prisoners and conduct thorough and transparent investigations into all alleged human rights violations. We urge Belarus to ensure accountability for the perpetrators and guarantee timely justice and adequate remedy and reparation for the victims. We also urge the Belarusian authorities to refrain from any action that may aid and facilitate the Russian illegal, unjustified, and unprovoked aggression against Ukraine. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Slovenia aligns with the EU statement. We thank the independent experts for their update. Slovenia remains deeply concerned by the reports of widespread violence and punishments against Belarusians that may amount to gross human rights violations. We urge Belarus to respect the human rights of all its citizens and to create space for democratic dialogue. We call upon Belarus to immediately release and fully rehabilitate all political prisoners. Their unconditional freedom, the restoration of their rights, and the recognition of their dignity are vital steps towards justice and reconciliation. We further urge the Belarusian authorities to stop enabling Russia's illegal, unprovoked, and unjustifiable war of aggression against Ukraine, and to enable immediate return of all deported and transferred Ukrainian children in clear violation of international humanitarian and human rights law. Finally, we call on Belarus to cooperate fully with all international mechanisms, grant access to independent experts, implement their recommendations, and ensure accountability. Madam Chair, what steps can be taken to exercise pressure for accountability, to secure the release of political prisoners, and to ensure immediate return of unlawfully deported children? Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to Austria.
Thank you, Mr. President. Austria aligns with the EU statement and welcomes the updates by the group of independent experts. We are troubled by the persecution, criminalization, and arbitrary detention of persons expressing dissenting opinions and those perceived as having opposing views. While we welcome recent releases of political prisoners, we continue to urge Belarus to halt the repressions against all sectors of civil society, independent media, independent trade unions, lawyers, and opposition groups, and cease harassments and reprisals against individuals exercising their human rights. Austria is particularly concerned about the appalling conditions of detention of political prisoners and to continued reports of deaths, torture, and ill treatment or denial of access to adequate medical treatment in detention. We reiterate our call for the immediate and unconditional release of all political prisoners. Austria is also deeply concerned by systematic violations of due process and the right to fair trial of persons perceived as opponents of the government. We call on Belarus to ensure fair trial and due process, including access to legal assistance without interference. Austria urges Belarus to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights in compliance with its obligations under international human rights law and to cooperate with the group of independent experts and all relevant human rights mechanisms and investigations. Madam Chair, before closing, let me reiterate our full support for your mandate and the important work in documenting the human rights situations in Belarus. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to Germany.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Germany aligns itself with the EU statement and thanks the group of independent experts on Belarus for their work. The level of national and transnational repression against civil society, opposition, media and trade unions in and from Belarus has only worsened since the last update in March. Civil society organizations are declared extremist and their members persecuted. Political prisoners face harsh detention conditions and have limited or no access to legal representation, medical care, or contact with their families. Belarusians who had to leave the country are facing in absentia trials and repercussions against family or friends. We welcome the recent releases of a number of political prisoners. At the same time, we urge the Belarusian authorities to immediately and unconditionally release the more than 1,100 political prisoners who still remain in custody, and to refrain from merely replacing them with new arrests. Former political prisoners are never really free. Even after having been released from prison, they are either forced to leave the country, are subjected to strict state supervision, or face being rearrested. Dear independent experts, how can we further support you in ensuring accountability for perpetrators and justice for victims in and from Belarus? I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to Romania.
Thank you, Vice President. Romania aligns with the EU statement and remains deeply concerned about the ongoing acts of repression, intimidation, arbitrary arrests, and politically motivated prosecutions targeting the media, human rights activists, lawyers, and the civil society of Belarus as a whole. We thank the group for its updates and the recent comprehensive report on closing the accountability gap, highlighting the systemic issues such as corruption, clientelism, repression, and a broken judicial system that prevent genuine accountability for gross human rights violations in Belarus since May 2020, and welcome its concrete recommendations. We appreciate the diplomatic efforts of all those involved in securing the release of several political prisoners in recent months, and we remain cautiously optimistic with regard to future developments. These developments, while important, remain insufficient. The release of some prisoners does not address the root causes of the widespread curtailment of civic and political space in Belarus and should not obscure the broader pattern of repression, nor dilute the fight for accountability measures against the complete environment of impunity revolving around blatant violations of human rights. Romania reiterates its call on Belarus to immediately release all political prisoners and to stop new arrests of individuals perceived as political opponents or just representing dissenting voices. We also express our call to Belarus to abide by its international obligations under international and human rights law and to cooperate with the UN mechanisms. Distinguished experts, looking ahead, what developments would you consider as signs of meaningful progress towards accountability and justice in Belarus?
Merci. La France à la...
Thank you. I give the floor to France. Thank you very much, Vice President. Madam Chair of the Group of Independent Experts, France would like to thank you for your all update. 5 years after the fraudulent presidential elections, the situation of human rights in Belarus is of great concern. According to the report, about 1,200 persons have been condemned for political reasons. Elections were held in the context of brutal repression against any political dissidents, the implementation of laws on extremism and terrorism to quiet the opposition is linked with policies of intimidation inside and outside the government. We condemn the unacceptable situation of political prisons. In 2024, dozens of cases of ill treatment and 2 deaths were documented. We urge the Belarusian authorities to give detainees the possibility to communicate with their families and have access to appropriate medical supports, and pardoned those prisoners with difficult health conditions. We praise the release of 52 political prisoners and encourage Belarus to continue along that path and free all political prisoners and put an end to the detention for unpolitical grounds. Thank you. Thank you. I give the floor to New Zealand.
Thank you, Vice President. New Zealand welcomes the report of the Group of Independent Experts and reiterates its grave concern at the deteriorating human rights situation in Belarus. As we have consistently stated, the ongoing repression of political opposition and dissent in Belarus is unacceptable. New Zealand has placed travel bans on selected individuals associated with the government of President Lukashenko, following ongoing concerns about the election fraud and human rights abuses after the sham elections in August 2020 and January 2025. We note the findings of the group of independent experts, and once again, we urge the Belarusian government to immediately and unconditionally release all those arbitrarily detained for peacefully expressing their views or gathering in peaceful protest. While we welcome recent initiatives to release political prisoners, we urge Belarus to conduct independent, impartial and transparent investigations into all allegations of human rights violations, especially torture and other cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment. Finally, New Zealand remains deeply concerned by the continued use of the death penalty in Belarus, the only country in Europe that still actively uses capital punishment. We call upon Belarus to heed repeated calls to abolish the death penalty, an inherently cruel and irreversible punishment. Thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to Australia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We thank the independent experts for their sobering update. Australia is deeply concerned and dismayed by reports of deaths in custody of political prisoners arbitrarily detained in Belarus for exercising their legitimate rights to freedoms of opinion and belief, expression and association. We support calls for a full investigation into these deaths in custody. We call for the immediate release of political prisoners who continue to be arbitrarily detained. Australia supports the democratic aspirations of Belarusians for a free, democratic and independent Belarus. We commend Belarusian civil society organisations and human rights defenders, including those in exile, who continue to undertake vital work in increasingly challenging conditions. We reiterate our calls on the Belarusian authorities to comply with their international human rights obligations, including to uphold the civil and political rights of Belarusians. Australia also reiterates its condemnation of the Belarusian government's complicity in the Russian Federation's aggression against Ukraine. We call on Belarus to immediately cease its support for Russia's illegal invasion. We ask, how can the international community ensure that the Belarusian government is held accountable for the ill treatment and deaths of those political prisoners arbitrarily detained in Belarus? I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. While we welcome the recent release of some political prisoners in Belarus, we remain gravely concerned. As the group of experts has highlighted, the regime continues to violate human rights on a systematic scale through arbitrary arrests, widespread repression, and the silencing of dissent. Dissidents, civil society activists, journalists, human rights defenders, and lawyers are still being prosecuted under the false pretext of combating extremism and terrorism. Despite the recent releases, around 1,100 political prisoners remain behind bars. As we have heard already today, many are held in isolation, many suffer mistreatment, and many are denied even basic medical care. In response, the UK has sanctioned over 200 individuals and 12 entities for their role in these abuses and for Belarus's continued support for Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. We will not waver in our support for Belarusian civil society and human rights defenders. To the representatives of Belarus, we say, release all political prisoners immediately and unconditionally. Prioritise those with health conditions, disabilities, the elderly, and parents separated from their children. Ensure their rehabilitation and guarantee fair and humane treatment for all detainees. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you. I give the floor to Ireland.
Thank you, Vice President. Ireland aligns with the statement of the EU and thanks the independent experts for their update. While Ireland acknowledges Belarus's decision to release some political prisoners this year, it is not enough. Over 1,000 more continue to suffer cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment and torture at the hands of Belarusian authorities. Ireland calls on Belarus to release all remaining political prisoners immediately. We condemn the repression of civil society and independent media, as well as the arbitrary detention of citizens for exercising their rights to freedom of expression, peaceful assembly and association. Ireland agrees with the independent experts that President Lukashenko has methodically instrumentalized the state apparatus to retain his hold on power, and that the government's brutal repression of dissenters' voices since May 2020 has been directly facilitated by the centralization of state powers in his hands. Ireland shares the independent experts' concern at Belarusian citizens' inability to rely on domestic courts for accountability, and notes the limitations of seeking justice at the international level. Any transition by Belarus must include the strengthening of judicial institutions, ensuring judicial independence, rule of law, and accountability. Independent experts, what steps can the international community take to close the accountability gap for human rights violations and related crimes in Belarus? Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Switzerland has the floor. Vice President, Switzerland thanks the group of independent experts for its oral update, and we reiterate our full support to you. We've taken note of the recent release of around 400 persons who were in arbitrary detention. It's regrettable that some of them have had their passports confiscated and others forced into exile. Nevertheless, arbitrary detention continues. Over 1,000 people remain in prison in Belarus for having exercised their rights of freedom of assembly or expression. We'd like to underscore that due process guarantees must be respected. We deplore terrible detention conditions, use of torture, sexual violence and arbitrary lengthening of sentences. We call upon Belarus to respect international human rights law and the complete ban on torture, and to ensure that conditions of detention are aligned with international standards. There must be access to places of detention by independent monitoring bodies, and there should also be visits to prisoners for next of kin and lawyers. What extrajudicial mechanisms can be used to ensure accountability and justice for the victims of human rights abuses? Thank you. This was the last speaker on my list. We're now going to move on to the list of speakers from national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations. The first speaker is the Law Society for a joint statement by video.
The Law Society of England and Wales, the International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute, Lloyds for Lawyers and Lawyers' Rights Watch Canada thank the group of independent experts on Belarus for their update and important work. Lawyers in Belarus continue to face disbarment, arbitrary detention, and prosecution simply for doing their job. Such action violates the UN Basic Principles on the role of lawyers. This harassment also extends beyond the border to lawyers who fled Belarus. Our organisations are alarmed by the State Security Committee's decision of the 18th of August to designate the Belarusian Association of Human Rights Lawyers as an extremist formation. This carries penalties of up to 10 years imprisonment. This association was founded by exiled lawyers and works to uphold the rights to defence, fair trial, and the independence of the legal profession. Its designation as extremist organisation is an arbitrary misuse of law that undermines fundamental freedoms. We urge this Council to demand an immediate withdrawal of the Association's designation as an extremist formation and an end to reprisals against Belarusian lawyers. We also call on members to raise these concerns during Belarus's upcoming Universal Periodic Review and to continue supporting the group of independent experts and Special Rapporteur in their vital work. Thank you.
Merci. Je passe.
Thank you. I call on National Human Rights Civic Association, Belarusian Helsinki Committee by video.
First President, Excellencies, colleagues, we shouldn't have to be here again raising the plight of political prisoners in Belarus, and yet we are. Despite recent releases, there are still more than 1,100 political prisoners. They continue to suffer cruel and inhumane treatment, leading to severe deterioration of health and tragically deaths in detention. At the moment, we are aware of 9 political prisoners who have died under such conditions. We urge the authorities to release all political prisoners unconditionally. Importantly, those who are released must have a real choice about their future, whether to remain in Belarus or to leave. Forcing people into exile is a cruel practice, depriving them of their dignity. Thus, the practice of releasing political prisoners must continue, but the practice of forced deportations must end. At the same time, arbitrary arrest, harassment at the border, pressure in workplaces, and the persecution of civil society organizations, political parties, trade unions, religious groups, and independent media must also stop. Moreover, we call for the repeal of repressive legislation introduced mainly after 2020, which legalized politically motivated persecution, including change to the criminal and administrative codes, so-called anti-extremism measures, restrictions on civil society, and discriminatory provisions targeting LGBTQ+ people, workers, and others. Belarus will soon report at the UPR, and we hope the members of this council will apply strong scrutiny and issue robust recommendations. We also urge members of this council to keep Belarus high on your agenda and to support efforts to stop repression and ensure accountability in Belarus. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to International Bar Association by video.
The International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute commends the work of the group of experts on Belarus and its recent report. We reiterate our condemnation of the ongoing repression of civil society in Belarus, and in particular systematic attacks and judicial harassment against lawyers representing dissenting voices, defending human rights or the rule of law. We condemn the recent KGB's designation of the Belarusian Association of Human Rights Lawyers as an extremist formation under Article 361 of the Criminal Code. This association was founded by exiled lawyers and works to uphold the rights to defense and fair trial and the independence of the legal profession. We call once more for the immediate release of lawyer Maxim Znak, arbitrarily detained since 2020 and held incommunicado. We recall that Belarus is a state party to, and therefore it is bound by, the Convention Against Torture, and we deplore the full subordination of the judiciary to the executive control, as well as the Ministry of Justice interference in the licensing and disciplinary procedures against lawyers, coupled with the Bar Association's failure to protect its members. While we note the recent release of 52 prisoners, more than 1,000 are still arbitrarily detained on politically motivated grounds, and therefore we urge Belarus to immediately release all these individuals, including lawyers, and end their further persecution. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to World Organization Against Torture.
Thank you. On behalf of the World Organization Against Torture, the International Federation for Human Rights, and the Human Rights Center of Yasna, we stress that the situation in Belarus has not improved. The recent politically motivated pardons of a few prisoners do not change the state-organized system of persecution. Since the last dialogue in March 2025, over 300 detentions, arrests, and searches have been documented, although the real figure is far higher as authorities continue to conceal massive violations amounting to crimes against humanity. Torture and ill treatment persist, including deaths in custody. On September 8, another political prisoner, Andrei Piadnaveni, died in prison number 15 in Mahileu. We further highlight the continued imprisonment of human rights defenders Ales Bialyatsky, Valyansin Stefanovic, Uladzimir Lavkovic, Marfa Ravkova, and Nasta Loika, along 20 side media workers, 25 trade union activists, and 7 independent lawyers. Finally, we strongly support the experts' findings on accountability gaps, and we urge all states to use the mechanisms outlined in this report. In this context, we would welcome the experts' views on whether state referrals of these international crimes to the ICC prosecutor could be an effective response to ongoing atrocities. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to World Register International.
Mr. Vice President, WRI, together with its partner Connection EV, thanks the group of independent experts for its report, which concluded that any initiative to fight impunity in Belarus is not limited to legal measure, but is carried out to ensure all the basic rights of victims. Repressive laws and policies continue to target grassroots civil society organizations, human rights defenders like Our House and Olga Karach, who has already received a first sentence in absentia. We are extremely concerned by the support of the current local government to the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine, in the ongoing violation of the right to conscience objection to military service, and the public censorship against objectors. Many Belarusian objectors and deserters are seeking protection abroad, and those who can flee the country are at risk of being deported back to Belarus, where they can face criminal prosecution, torture, and long-term imprisonment. We have been reported the recent cases of Sergei Nikitsin, Mikita Zvirid, Raman Ladik, Ilya Ladik, and Led Smirnov, who apply for protection in Lithuania. We are also alarmed by the increasing militarization of children and by their exposure to paramilitary trainings. WRI and Connection EV call on this council to actively participate in the upcoming UPR of Belarus, recommending the full implementation of the human right to conscience objection to military service in the General Assembly resolution on death penalty, repealing Article 356. We also call on individual member states to grant asylum to Belarusian conscience objectors and human rights defenders in line with UNHCR guidelines on international protection. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Human Rights House Foundation.
Thank you, Vice President. We congratulate the experts for their groundbreaking conference room paper. It concludes that senior state officials, including the Belarusian president, bear personal responsibility for directing the organized campaign of repression in Belarus and for complicity in violations that may amount to crimes against humanity. The paper demonstrates how a range of state institutions, from the security services and police to the judiciary and prison system, have worked together to maintain this repressive system, and documents the forced exile of up to 600,000 Belarusians. Despite recent releases, more than 1,000 political prisoners still remain behind bars. Among them, prominent human rights defenders such as Ales Bielatsky, Uladzimir Labkovich, Valentin Stefanovic, Marfa Rabkova, and Nasta Loika. In the face of such impunity, international accountability is critical. The conference room paper maps various concrete pathways for justice at the national and international level, including corporate accountability. It also stresses victims' rights to truth, remedy, and reparation, underscoring important non-criminal forms of accountability that we should also be pursuing. Vice President, recent forced deportations of pardoned political prisoners further illustrate how exile is being weaponized. Given that the Rome Statute recognizes deportation as a crime against humanity, and that some states have asked for the ICC to examine this on jurisdictional grounds, we ask the experts how such practices should be assessed.
Thank you. I give the floor to Advocate for Human Rights.
Mr. Vice President, the Belarusian Coalition of Organizations, Initiatives, and Activists Against Gender-Based and Domestic Violence and the Advocates for Human Rights express their appreciation to the group of experts for their work and latest report. We would like to take this opportunity to highlight the importance of addressing gender-based violence against women when undertaking measures on accountability, access to justice, and effective remedies. Belarus has failed to fulfill its obligations to protect, prosecute, and prevent gender-based violence throughout the years. This failure has manifested in a lack of specialized legislation and the existence of legislation that prioritizes preservation of family unity over support and safety for survivors, as well as a judicial system with substantial barriers to protection, accountability, and justice. Since 2020, a coordinated repression against civil society has led to the closure of approximately 2,000 NGOs, including the dismantling of those running hotlines, shelters, counseling services, and awareness campaigns that previously helped thousands of women. The remaining government-run services often lack trained staff, confidentiality, or trauma-informed care. We raise the necessity to call on the state of Belarus to adopt comprehensive legislation to address gender-based violence against women, especially concerning domestic violence, as well as continuing to recommend cessation of repression of civil society and specialized NGOs, including the dismissal of all charges, the closure of criminal cases, and allowing them to resume their operations without fear of reprisal. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Article 19 by video.
Article 19 and Human Constant thank the group of experts for their oral update. Our recent report, Quashing Online Dissent, highlights how the Belarusian authorities continue to brand almost any dissent as extremism through overbroad and vague legislation. Imprecision is the authoritarian's power. The broader and vaguer the term, the easier it is to convert a meme, a donation, or a simple like into a crime. The definitions are stretched, redrafted, and even applied retroactively, so yesterday's unlawful post can become today's crime. The cost of this crackdown is measured in lives, with scores of human rights defenders and other civil society actors deemed to be extremists dying in prison. While over 300 political prisoners have been released in several waves of pardons, over 1,000 remain behind bars. Nasta Loika continues to serve a 7-year prison sentence under one of the most notorious extremism articles. She's been subject to torture, and last month she was moved to confinement in a 4 square meter unheated bare cell. Currently on a so-called terrorist list, all monetary transfers to her are now qualified as terrorism financing. Her lawyers have been intimidated, disbarred, and persecuted. This crackdown is fostering fear and isolation and dismantling social bonds that sustain civic resistance and democracy, further entrenching authoritarian rule. We urge states to intensify their demands on that Belarus comply with its international human rights obligations, including to explicitly call for the immediate release of Nasta Loika and all other prisoners sentenced on politically motivated grounds, as well as to explore additional avenues for accountability. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to International Commission of Jurists.
Mr. Vice President, the ICJ reiterates its condemnation of the ongoing repression of civil society and erosion of the independence of the legal profession in Belarus, in particular the continued reprisals against lawyers and human rights defenders. The ICJ supports the findings of the group of independent experts, including its assessment of Belarus' persistent failure to ensure the right to fair trials and access to justice. Lawyers have faced harassment, arbitrary detention, spurious prosecutions, criminal sanctions, and unjustified revocation of their license in retaliation for their legitimate professional work and public statements. The Bar Association is not independent, and its disciplinary bodies are misused as tools to suppress lawyers' independent work. Some have been disbarred, criminally prosecuted, or forced into exile, leaving many detainees without access to legal defense. Last month, the Independent Belarusian Association of Human Rights Lawyers was declared by the authorities an extremist formation, exposing its members to possible prison sentences of up to 10 years. The ICJ deplores Belarus' continuous practice of torture and ill treatment, a large number of political prisoners, and the use and expansion of the death penalty. The ICJ calls on all states to cooperate with a group of independent experts and other relevant UN mechanisms. It urges the Belarusian authorities to immediately release all individuals arbitrarily detained for political reasons, including lawyers, and end the further persecution. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Conscience and Peace Tax International.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Madam Moskalensko, the release of 52 political prisoners, which you mentioned in your opening remarks, must be seen in the context of a rising total of political prisoners, with over 70 new imprisonments in August alone. It has been alleged that the latest arrests included many charged for participation in the original 2020 demonstrations. The latest facial recognition systems and metadata from mobile phones are being used in the service of a very old-fashioned repressive authoritarian regime, including to identify Belarusians returning from abroad, from photographs or videos of past protests, and to prosecute them in violation of their freedom of assembly. As the evidence you have quoted shows, such persons have no hope of a fair trial, face imprisonment in cruel, inhuman or degrading conditions, and risk torture. On the 3rd of September, Andrei Podjabeni died in detention, bringing to 9 the number of deaths of political prisoners since 2020. States can do very little to influence Belarus to mend its ways, but they can take action to protect those fleeing from Belarus. We encourage all states, but in particular Lithuania, which receives most Belarusian refugees and which in its statement this afternoon so eloquently described the repression, to refrain from all refoulement. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. This was the last speaker on my list. I would now like to give the floor to the chair of the group of independent experts for your final remarks. You have 3 minutes and 10 seconds.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, representative of the civil society, referring to the ways that international community may ensure accountability for and seize of serious human rights violation taking place in Belarus, the group welcomes the opening of the preliminary examination of the situation by the Office of the Prosecutors of the ICC initiated by Lithuania. It is a good example of the way member states can work to promote accountability through viable avenues within international justice mechanism. In addition to the use of universal and extraterritorial jurisdiction in response to long-standing calls for victims and civil society. The group also commends some member states' efforts in conducting relevant criminal proceedings at national jurisdiction outside Belarus. It is one of means to advance accountability on the basis of the principles of extraterritorial or universal jurisdiction. In addition to possible prosecution, efforts to collect, document, and preserve evidence of the violation must continue. Leveraging the International Court of Justice for Belarus' systematic violation of its state's obligation under the Convention Against Torture is again another venue that would merit consideration by state parties to the CAT. In parallel, member states can explore further targeted measures against credibly alleged perpetrators of grave human rights violation and abuses in accordance with international law. Accountability also encompasses non-judicial mechanisms, including truth-seeking reparation and various measures to prevent the recurrence of new violation, notably constitutional, legal, and institutional reform, the strengthening of civil society, memorialization efforts, cultural initiative, the preservation of archive, and the reform of history education. It is extremely important to support critical role that is played by civil society that is collecting the evidence of abuses present in Belarus. Our group of experts continues to collect and preserve evidence with a view to assisting accountability process. In addition, it has compiled files on individuals and entities that it has reasonable ground to believe bear responsibility for gross human rights violation, including those which amount to crimes under international law. We stand ready to provide also technical assistance to the government of Belarus in its effort to provide recognition to victims, enhance the truth of individuals in state situation, reinforce respect for human rights, and promote the rule of law as a step toward reconciliation and the prevention of new violations, because it is important to stress that actually it is Belarusian law and Belarusian constitution that is not observed by the Belarusian state.
On the question of deportation, we are investigating allegations of human rights violations committed in the context of the release of political prisoners, including the allegations of deportation. We have already identified numerous investigative leads that we will be following up with regarding political prisoners recently released, and we will be reporting on our next mandate report in March 2026 on our findings. The question of what the international community can do to further encourage release of political prisoners. We encourage the diplomatic community to continue to liaise with Belarus to release political prisoners in accordance with international human rights law and humanitarian standards, reinforcing in accordance with international law and humanitarian standards. Since our mandate became operational, Belarusian President Lukashenko has pardoned dozens of people who have been convicted for participating in the 2020 protests. These pardoned have reportedly admitted guilt, sincerely repented for what they did, and committed to a law-abiding way of life. But we also note the significant releases recently of high-profile political prisoners. Again, the full circumstances of these releases have been marred in human rights violations and abuses themselves. But they represent but a small number of those arrested and should not conceal today's reality in Belarus with the gross human rights violations and related crimes against humanity that are continuing to take place. Despite the release of these political prisoners by the government, measures of repression and intimidation aimed at suppressing dissent and further reducing civic space persist, as many of the speakers here today have also reinforced. Security forces have continued to conduct arrests with heavy-handed tactics, resorting to violence, threats, and intimidation even when facing no resistance. And of the numbers of political prisoners who've been released, approximately 170, 283 have been newly arrested. And what can the international community do to ensure accountability? The group commends member states pursuing criminal proceedings outside Belarus under the universal jurisdiction and extraterritorial principles and stresses the need to continue collecting and preserving evidence of violations. So in addition to possible prosecutions, efforts to collect, document, and preserve evidence of these violations must continue. Member states can also consider targeted measures against alleged perpetrators, provided they are lawful, proportionate, time-limited, and subject to independent human rights safeguards and monitorings. Member states may also want to coordinate effectively with other states to support civil society engaged in accountability efforts at the national and regional level, which can include information sharing, provision of mutual legal assistance, and technical support. Leveraging the ICC for Belarus's systemic violations of state obligations under the International Court of Justice for Belarus's systemic violations of its state obligations under the Convention Against Torture is another avenue that would merit consideration by state parties to the convention. Our group of experts continues to collect and preserve evidence with a view to assisting accountability processes. In addition, we have compiled files on individuals and entities that we have reasonable grounds to believe bear responsibility for gross human rights violations, including those which amount to crimes against international law. We have prepared a consolidated analysis of all state units and entities involved in the commission of these violations and have a dedicated member of our team whose work it is to establish the chain of command. We have compiled, analyzed, and preserved relevant public statements from high-level Belarusian officials and mapped out all detention facilities in which torture, cruel, and inhuman and degrading treatment have been documented. Thank you for your attention.
Merci.
Thank you, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. This brings us to the end of this interactive dialogue. I'd like to thank the members of the group of independent experts for having taken part in this debate. We will now take a very short technical break so that we can then proceed with the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on Burundi. Thank you.
Excellences, distingués collègues.
Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, we're now going to begin our interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Burundi. I'm delighted to welcome Special Rapporteur Mr. Fortuné Gaëtan Zongo. The speakers list will close in 15 minutes. I would now like to give the floor to Mr. Gaëtan Zongo to present his report. You have a total of 15 minutes. Thank you. Vice President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, 1 year after I presented my last report to this august assembly, I'm appearing before you again to recall that the implementation of my mandate continues to be hindered by a lack of cooperation from the Burundian authorities. Nevertheless, despite not being able to conduct visits to the country, I have conducted my mandate with professionalism, objectively and impartially. I would like to reiterate my invitation to the Burundian authorities to engage in a constructive dialogue with this mandate, with full respect for their international commitments. I understand concerns regarding the nature of the mandate. Nevertheless, I think it's worth recalling that these reservations could be considered distancing oneself from the Human Rights Council's decisions, whereas Burundi is actually a member of the Council and contributes to them. Vice President, ladies and gentlemen, 10 years after the electoral crisis of 2015, there are still concerns about the human rights situation in Burundi. Weak institutions means that they can't play their role in promoting and protecting human rights. An independent justice system is a mere mirage. Interference in governance institutions and weakening of national human rights mechanisms are commonplace. The Independent National Human Rights Commission has been undermined by political interference and irregularities, whereas the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has been weakened by political pressure, which has led to the flight of a number of commissioners. Civil and political rights have been a true challenge for Burundians over the past 12 months. In June of this year, Burundi held legislative, senatorial and local elections. This electoral process began in 2023 and has been overshadowed by the weakening and almost annihilation of any political parties that could contest the power with the ruling party. In fact, these elections, which should have been stepping stones towards democratic consolidation, were regrettably punctuated by serious irregularities. Opposition leaders were excluded. The population was forced to contribute to the ruling party, and there was a climate of intimidation and violence. The results were that the ruling party got over 96% of votes, which means that this was a process which was far removed from international rules and principles concerning free, transparent, and fair elections. At the same time, we've received considerable information attesting to serious violations, such as arbitrary arrests, prolonged detention, torture, and enforced disappearances, which can be ascribed to the security services and to the Imbonerakure militia. Between August 2024 and June of this year, around 40 enforced disappearances were documented, targeting above all political opponents. The humanitarian situation has also deteriorated. Since February of this year, over 67,000 Congolese have crossed the border seeking refuge. This has led to more discrimination and worrying violations that have been committed by refugee camp managers. The refugee situation is particularly alarming. Around half of them still live in refugee camps, exposing them to a number of risks. Certain organizations are doing whatever they can to care for them and to restore a minimum of dignity, and one cannot overlook the extraordinary contribution of organizations such as Marguerite Barankitse's Shalom House. I'd also like to draw your attention to land appropriation, which is one of the major sources of impoverishment and exclusion. Land and property is regularly confiscated from individuals and communities, often without appropriate compensation or effective remedies, and this particularly targets those considered opposition sympathizers or from minority groups. I would also like to mention the joint statement published by a number of special procedures on the 1st of September this year, entitled Burundi, United Nations experts concerned by an increase in serious human rights violations during the electoral period. This statement, which was co-signed by myself and by many others, such as the Working Group on Enforced Disappearance, the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, and others. And it reveals enforced disappearance, arbitrary detention, summary execution, torture, sexual violence, attacks against journalists and civil society, as well as restrictions on freedom of expression, peaceful assembly and association. The mechanisms unanimously underlined these violations, including the case of Sandra Muhoza, a journalist who's been held in prison for over a year following messages she posted in a WhatsApp group for media professionals. Civil society and human rights defenders in Burundi are repressed, but civil society in exile is dynamic and ensures effective monitoring and awareness. We have to acknowledge their contribution to the protection of human rights in Burundi. Some of them are the Iteka League, Fokode, Tournons la Page, Fiacat, Acat Burundi, the Inamahoro movement, and the Coalition for the Defense of Human Rights of people living in refugee camps. And there are many others as well. Vice President, ladies and gentlemen, the situation for economic and social rights is also extremely worrying. Around 2.2 million Burundians face food insecurity, and the country has the highest index of hunger in the world. The health system is underfunded and can't respond to basic needs. Women face structural discrimination, particularly in access to land, inheritance, and this is compounded by a recent law which enshrines the primacy of customary law in gender equality. These property dynamics undermine trust in institutions, compound local tensions, and jeopardize national reconciliation. Vice President, ladies and gentlemen, these worrying findings compel us to act. I'm making recommendations for all stakeholders. For the government of Burundi, you must organize an inclusive dialogue and free and credible elections in 2027. There must be a stop to impunity and impartial inquiries into human rights violations. The independence of the justice system must be consolidated, and there must be greater credibility for national human rights protection mechanisms. Also, land rights must be respected and abusive expropriation stopped. Vice President, there's no doubt that the Burundian people aspire to peace, justice, dignity, and human rights. My mandate remains ready to contribute to this goal through a sincere and constructive dialogue. Burundi needs sustained support, not just to respond to current violations, but also to rebuild trust, strengthen institutions, and work towards true reconciliation. I'd like to thank you for your kind attention.
Merci. Excellent. Distingué.
Thank you, colleagues. In line with established practice, we will now listen to the delegation of the country concerned. I'd like to now give the floor to distinguished representative of Burundi. You have 5 minutes, Excellency. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Burundi has just successfully concluded legislative and local elections that enjoyed broad participation of the population in a safe and peaceful environment as recognized by all international observers. Population that responded the observers that responded to the call by the government to participate in electoral processes. It is therefore absurd, if not senseless, to hear the sponsor of this mechanism imposed in my country, and that is the European Union, to fail to recognize to having given the Council information that has voluntarily been doctored to demand the renewal of this mandate, invoking the need for an early monitoring procedure, and then to get further bogged down and stating in the following terms that even if the elections took place without any major breakout of violence, Burundi must continue to be under monitoring until the presidential elections of 2027. This simplistic argument sufficiently demonstrates the letter and spirit of the resolution that created this council is deliberately being trampled on with the intention to maintain pressure on Burundi, an agenda launched in 2015 in the aftermath of the failure to overthrow the republican institutions of my country. Mr. Vice President, being a mandate holder of a special procedure of the Council requires, according to the Code of Conduct, to have proven notions of integrity, impartiality, fairness, honesty, and good faith. The obligation, a fundamental obligation incumbent on the mandate is a strict respect for truth, loyalty, and independence. And these principles are not optional, but are an obligation without any expectation to show moderation and restraint is an essential condition that recognizes the independent character of their mandate. Now, do we see this high sense of responsibility and ethics in the report when the special rapporteur impudently affirms, and I quote, that among the Congolese refugees welcomed in Burundi fleeing the violence in the east of the DRC this year, the Bonyamulenge the Tutsi are discriminated against by our authorities. that is when they have been living peacefully for more than 20 years in Burundi, that several violations to the right of property, right to property, land tenure security, and access to justice target members of the Tutsi community by influential personalities of my country. Now, what representative of the Tutsi community in Burundi mandated you to speak on their behalf? The Rubicon has been crossed. The scale and degree of seriousness of such allegations, which are defamatory, dangerous, and irresponsible with ethnic overtones, are be taken to account because they question the mission of this council. Has this mandate become a tool of division, of categorization of our communities, conveying discriminatory remarks based on political motivations? Where 10 years ago we saw that under the cover of a peaceful demonstration, they transformed it into a bloody insurrection, and they tried to plunge my country back into the throes of a civil and fratricidal war to finally arrive to power. Now, has this mandate become a tool of propaganda that praises a disorganized opposition to the detriment of the voice of the people and dehumanizes young people in my country and contests the legitimacy of the republic institutions of Burundi? This mandate ignores the provisions of the UN Charter that imposes the fundamental principle of respect for the sovereignty of states, and it's trying to usurp the prerogatives and to call into question bilateral relations of two countries. For example, the cooperation and defense agreement between the DRC and Burundi. Mr. President, this mechanism is no longer at the service of promoting and defending human rights as it was supposed to be. Indeed, in view of the content of the report opposing one ethnic group to another at the risk of arousing mistrust and suspicion between communities in a context of people that is rebuilding itself or returning to the fundamentals of its ancestral values despised by the former colonizer, the only conclusion that can be drawn to this by this council is that this mandate is seriously compromised and has just lost what little credibility and legitimacy it had. We cannot tolerate any ethnic discourse used as a political instrument. Burundi protests and will not give in. Now I give the floor to the Commission on Human Rights of Burundi. You have 3 minutes. Mr. Vice President, in Burundi, 2025 was marked by the election of deputies, councillors at local and national levels. The electoral process was carried out in a peaceful and calm context. The Human Rights Institution declares that the actors of the Joint Human Rights Program and civil society organizations carry out their mission. The UNHRC of Burundi is the guarantor of the respect of the Paris principles guiding the work of all human rights institutions. We have to note that the nomination of commissaries has respected the law of Burundi, so there is no violation of the law when a competent organ exercises its legislative competencies, both inside and outside of Burundi. My country would like to praise the efforts of the government and encourages to continue its further cooperation with international regional organizations for the implementation of the human rights instruments that have been ratified. For the protection of the rights of detainees, we plead for the separation of the cases, and prisoners suffering from mental illnesses should be placed in specialized centers, and those who have completed their prison sentences should be released. In terms of the freedom of the press, the UNHRC praises the measures to decriminalize some activities, and we also demand that human rights defenders should benefit from strengthened protection and that journalists should be freed. When we talk about acts of abduction and forced disappearances, the UNHRC objectively condemns such practices that run counter to criminal justice. When we talk about prisoners that have been condemned for politically motivated crimes, we propose to review the criminal code and find measures to commute their sentences. We also believe that the government should focus on a law on amnesty and decide on the liberation of certain prisoners who've completed their sentences, and this all to implement the decree on conditional release. These procedures should be facilitated, especially in cases of human rights defenders, and this should be done quickly, and also apply other measures in order to reduce overcrowding in prisons. Thank you very much. Thank you, Excellencies, colleagues. I'd like to inform you that the list of speakers is now closed. I would like to now invite interested delegations to ask questions and make comments on the report. I give 1 minute 30 seconds to all speakers. The first speaker is the European Union. Mr. Vice President, Special Rapporteur, the European Union thanks you for the presentation of your report that continues to highlight the situation concerning situation of human rights in Burundi. We're concerned with the continuation of numerous violations of fundamental rights and severe restrictions on the freedom of assembly, association, pacific and peaceful meetings. Impunity still remains, and we condemn the intimidations of members of civil society, journalists and human rights defenders. The context in which legislative elections of 5 June were held give rise to questions related to the credibility of these elections and their openness. We regret the limited level of cooperation with UN mechanisms, and we continue to urge the government of Burundi to fully cooperate with the mechanism, especially giving the special rapporteur access to the country. The EU would also invite the government to set up national human rights institutions that are truly independent and that enjoy transparent, inclusive procedures. Special Rapporteur, what are the main areas that will help put an end to the situation of crisis in Burundi. I give the floor to Ghana on behalf of the African Group.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The African Group family believes in universality, objectivity, and non-selectivity in addressing human rights issues worldwide, as outlined in Resolution 60/251. Consequently, we strongly oppose politicization and double standards and believe that the consent of the concerned state remains a crucial element for the success of the implementation of the mandate of any mechanisms established by the Human Rights Council. We recognize that the promotion and protection of human rights should be based on the principles of cooperation and genuine dialogue, and aimed at strengthening the capacity of member states to comply with their human rights obligations. Mr. Vice President, all countries must be valued fairly and equally in full respect of their national sovereignty, recognizing that states have the primary responsibility in promoting and protecting human rights. We therefore recognize the merit of the UPR. The African Group welcomes the various initiatives undertaken by the government of Burundi in consolidating the human rights situation, including its constructive engagement with the UPR mechanism and also with treaty bodies. The African Group reiterates the necessity of an objective and constructive approach in analyzing the evolution of human rights in Burundi and invites the international community to take into account the government's commitments and to support its efforts. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Iceland on behalf of a group of countries.
Mr. Vice President, I have the honor to deliver the statement on behalf of the Nordic Baltic states. We thank the Special Rapporteur for his valuable reporting. We remain deeply concerned that he continues to be denied access to the country. Serious human rights violations and abuses continue to persist in Burundi, taking place in the context of widespread impunity for past and ongoing atrocities. We remain deeply concerned by several restrictions of freedoms of opinion, expression, and peaceful assembly, and by reports of torture and other cruel, inhuman, and or degrading treatment or punishment, and widespread sexual and gender-based violence. Victims and survivors of torture and STBV must receive urgent care, including access to psychosocial support and comprehensive sexual and reproductive health services. We deplore the shrinking civic space leading up to the elections held in June, which was undermined by the absence of a free and fair electoral process, and express particular concern for the period ahead of the 2027 elections. We reiterate our call on the government of Burundi to engage with the UN human rights mechanisms, including the Special Rapporteur, as a crucial step towards ensuring accountability. Special Rapporteur, how can the international community best support the protection of human rights in Burundi in the run-up to the 2027 elections? I thank you.
Merci. Thank you. I give the floor to South Sudan.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. South Sudan takes note of the report of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Burundi and aligns with the African statement. We reaffirm our constant stance that advancing human rights aspects requires prior consent of the countries concerned. To ensure conducive atmosphere for constructive dialogue and objective cooperation with mandate holders. Mr. Vice President, South Sudan commends Burundi for upholding human rights under the UN framework and for cooperating with the UN mechanisms by submission of its combined 11th 19th periodic reports to the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Mr. Vice President, to conclude, we encourage both the Council and the international community to assist Burundi in line with its national plan and priorities. We thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to Sri Lanka.
Mr. Vice President, Sri Lanka reiterates its opposition to country-specific mandates which do not enjoy the support of the country concerned. Constructive dialogue with the concerned state is the best way to assist them in a meaningful manner rather than naming and shaming. The HRC must adhere to its founding principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity, and non-selectivity. We welcome the government of Burundi's continuous engagement with the Human Rights Council through its regular mechanisms, including the treaty bodies. Sri Lanka recognizes the efforts of the government of Burundi towards tackling poverty and social inequalities, as well as fighting corruption, while working constructively towards protecting the human rights of the people of Burundi. Mr. Vice President, we encourage the Human Rights Council to assist Burundi's national processes aimed at sustainable recovery and development in accordance with the national priorities of the government of Burundi. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to Uganda.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We align with the African Group statement. We remain very interested in the developments in Burundi as a close neighbor. We commend the government of Burundi for the milestones made in governance and the restoration of peace and stability towards enjoying human rights. We noted that the report decries the state of refugees in camps in Burundi and the suffering they continue to endure. As the largest refugee hosting country in Africa, Uganda, heading towards 2 million, we totally understand the burden and responsibility that the government of Burundi is facing, that we share. And this begs the question, Special Rapporteur, have you engaged the international community on the principle of equitable burden and responsibility sharing in protecting and assisting refugees? Invite the mandate and this council to acknowledge the in-kind contribution that the government of Burundi is shouldering in hosting refugees. They are doing so much. In fact, they're the biggest donors in this case, and they don't deserve the shaming on the state of refugees. The lack of cooperation with the special rapporteur that he also decries is not news and should not be news to any of us, because this same council unfortunately facilitates the continued imposition of mandates on countries without their consent, despite not registering any success since its inception. We pay attention every day to hear from the mandate whether there is any improvement. To the contrary, things seem to be worsening. So the question, what success have we got from forcing this mandate on Burundi? I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to Belgium. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. My delegation aligns itself with the statement made by the European Union. My country would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for his report. We fully support the mandate and we call upon Burundi to cooperate in a constructive manner with the Rapporteur and other mechanisms established by the Council, especially as a member. Belgium stresses the importance to investigate all the reported cases of enforced disappearances, extrajudicial execution, and torture, as well as set up mechanisms to prevent those occurrences. We encourage the authorities of the country to implement recommendations of the Committee Against Torture from 2023. Following the peaceful elections of June 2025, Belgium stressed also the importance of respecting the freedom of expression and the rights of the opposition. The obstacles and challenges observed by electoral missions should be taken into account during the next electoral cycle. The respect of principles of democracy and freedom is fundamental in order to ensure national accord. Also, the preservation of political pluralism will make it possible to offer the guarantees for the democratic vitality of the country. Mr. Special Rapporteur, you stress the structural discriminations faced by women, as well as gender-based violence, often not open to information. How can you support the Burundian government to respond to this major challenge? Thank you. I give the floor to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. The DRC would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for the presentation of his report on the situation of human rights in Burundi. And we align ourselves with the statement made by the African group. The DRC praises the continued efforts of the government of the Burundi in the area of the promotion and protection of human rights, despite the complex social economic challenges faced by the country. My delegation appreciates the recent political evolution in the country, especially in the organization of legislative local organizations that were safe and peaceful and inclusive, based on the comments made by the observers of the African Union. We'd like to urge the international community to support Burundi in its progress towards development through cooperation and dialogue, and we stress the need to have a constructive approach to ensure progress in the country. Also, the DRC would like to thank Burundi for having hosted Congolese refugees following the invasion of a large part of North and South Kivu of forces supported by Rwanda, and we would like to urge the international community to provide financial support for these refugees. Finally, we praise the levels of positive cooperation between the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, its mechanisms, and Burundi, and we encourage the strengthening of this cooperation through dialogue and understanding. Thank you. Thank you. I give the floor now to the DPRK.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The DPRK delegation expressed concern that the report of the Special Rapporteur portrays the human rights situation in Burundi in a negative manner and interprets certain incidents in a biased way. The measures taken by the government of the Burundi to protect human rights and strengthen social stability, as well as its cooperation with the international organizations, have been ignored. Some Western countries are manipulating information and distorting facts to achieve their political objectives, thereby unjustly criticizing Burundi. Such one-sided and malicious reports seriously undermine the credibility and fairness of the international community. We call upon all member states to respect the sovereignty and independence of Burundi. Thank you.
Merci, je passe.
Thank you. I call on the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Thank you, Vice President. Venezuela acknowledges Burundi's efforts and its political will to protect the human rights of its people. In this regard, we reject politicization and selectivity activity in the Council by imposing mandates that don't have the consent of the concerned country. Such actions are a flagrant violation of the universal principles enshrined in the UN Charter, such as respect for sovereignty and non-interference in the internal affairs of states. We regret that the Council continues to promote these activities which don't have a positive impact. On the other hand, it doesn't foster dialogue, cooperation and mutual understanding, which are the only ways to correctly address national human rights challenges, particularly against the backdrop of the liquidity crisis, in which mandates which have been imposed are have been seen to be on the increase. This is a waste of scarce resources. We want to call upon the Council to resume the principles of selectivity, impartiality and objectivity and eradicate these mechanisms for once and for all, because they undermine the credibility of the Council. Thank you. I call on Sudan. Thank you, Vice President. Sudan endorses the African Group statement. We've taken note of the report from the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Burundi and his recommendations. We hailed the Burundian government's efforts to promote and protect human rights, strengthen governance, and undertake judicial reform, achieve economic development, and its efforts to promote national reconciliation and inclusive dialogue and transitional justice mechanisms. We also congratulate Burundi on the general elections held in June of this year. This was an important milestone towards achieving stability. Burundi has shown its will to cooperate with human rights mechanisms through its membership of this council and ECOSOC and its regular reporting to the UPR and the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, CERD. We call upon the High Commissioner to continue to provide technical assistance in line with Burundi's requirements and wishes. We would like to know how imposed mandates actually help to improve the human rights situation in Burundi or anywhere else in the world. Thank you. Thank you. I call on Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Ethiopia reaffirms its principled position that the promotion and protection of human rights must be guided by the core principles of this Council: universality, objectivity, non-selectivity, and constructive engagement. Ethiopia underscores the importance of technical assistance and capacity building in strengthening national mechanisms for the promotion and protection of human rights. We recognize the primary responsibility of the state to protect and fulfill the rights of its people, and we encourage continued support to Burundi in this regard. We commend the positive steps undertaken by Burundi, including the implementation of reforms, continued cooperation with the UN human rights mechanisms, including the Universal Periodic Review Working Group, and engagement with regional mechanisms. Ethiopia encourages Burundi to sustain momentum in implementing accepted UPR recommendations and to deepen its engagement with the UN Human Rights Council in a spirit of partnership. In conclusion, Ethiopia firmly believes that strengthening cooperation with states, complementing their national efforts, and focusing on mechanisms that foster constructive dialogue is beneficial to the long-standing efforts to ensure protection of human rights. Constructive engagement remains the most effective path to durable peace. I thank you.
Merci. Je passe.
Thank you. I call on Germany.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Germany aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union and thanks the Special Rapporteur for his update. The human rights situation in Burundi remains of concern. Germany is concerned by reports about violations of fundamental rights, namely arbitrary detentions, forced abductions, torture, and discretionary limitations to the freedom of press and expression. We call on the government of Burundi to ensure full access to justice for all victims of human rights violations which have so far often enjoyed impunity. We reiterate our concerns about the independence of the National Human Rights Commission. It remains of utmost priority that all commissions, national rights commissions, execute their mandates independently without any interference. In the same way, we encourage the government of Burundi to cooperate with the Special Rapporteur and allow the reopening of the Human Rights Office of the United Nations. Special Rapporteur, we wish to underscore the importance of your annual oral update for the work of this Council. Special Rapporteur, what more can the international community do to improve and support Burundi in assisting and improving the human rights situation, including the situation of the refugees where you were alluding to? Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on the United Republic of Tanzania.
Mr. Vice President, the United Republic of Tanzania aligns with the statement made on behalf of the African Group. As we welcome the efforts of the government of Burundi in promoting and protecting human rights, we reiterate the importance for the international community to provide the necessary assistance to complement the efforts taken by the government without undermining the sovereignty of the country. We further urge international actors in cooperation with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to increase the budget for the relevant refugees programs in various regions in order to relieve the burden of the host countries. The United Republic of Tanzania will continue to work with Burundi, the international community, and all relevant stakeholders to ensure the safe and voluntary repatriation of all Burundian refugees. I thank you.
Merci, je passe la parole.
Thank you. I call on Eritrea.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We have taken note of the report of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Burundi. It is regrettable that the report contains no positive developments and fails to acknowledge any of the tangible progress, instead presenting an entirely negative assessment throughout. Eritrea reiterates its principal position that country-specific mandates established without the consent of the concerned state continue to be counterproductive. Such mechanisms have consistently failed to foster trust or encourage positive developments. We believe it is time to bring an end to this particular mandate, which after a decade has proven neither constructive nor balanced. Burundi, like all sovereign nations, bear the primary responsibility for promoting and protecting the human rights of its citizens, and this responsibility should be supported through cooperation rather than external imposition. Eritrea emphasizes once again that the Council's role is best fulfilled through dialogue, technical assistance, and constructive engagement with states in full respect of their sovereignty and national ownership. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on Kenya.
President. Kenya aligns with the Africa Group statement. We recognize the continued incremental efforts made by Burundi to re-engage with regional and international human rights mechanisms despite ongoing challenges. Kenya commends the government of Burundi for resuming submissions to United Nations treaty bodies and for hosting recent dialogues with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. We further recognize Burundi's election to the ECOSOC and participation in multilateral forums, reflecting the continuing commitment to regional and international engagement. We especially note the measures taken to bolster judicial capacity, including appointing judges and expanding local courts, which signal recognition of the need for a robust justice sector. Kenya encourages Burundi to continue building upon these steps as it pursues greater accountability, protection of civil liberties, and institutional independence. Political will and constructive dialogue remain critical to this journey. We further call for sustained international support, technical and financial, to be made available to ensure progress in human rights outcomes and to support the region's humanitarian efforts in host countries. We reaffirm our commitment to supporting Burundi in the spirit of African solidarity towards a future of greater human rights respect, stability, and prosperity for all. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on France. Thank you, Vice President. Special Rapporteur, France, along with the EU, reiterates its full support for your mandate. We'd like to thank you for your report. 10 years after the electoral crisis in Burundi, the situation remains alarming. There are constant human rights violations, murders, enforced disappearances, summary killings, and a lack of pluralism during the various elections in 2025. There's attacks on the independence of the justice system, whilst opponents, journalists, and human rights defenders are constantly repressed. We remain worried about information attesting to torture and ill treatment of political opponents in Burundi. The National Human Rights Commission has no legitimacy with failure to respect the Paris Principles. France supports the renewal of your mandate, Special Rapporteur, and we call on Burundi to cooperate with all UN mechanisms and allow in regular visits, just as it did for the African Commission on People and Human Rights. It's important to put a stop to attacks on fundamental rights immediately. Thank you. Thank you. I now call on Rwanda.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Rwanda takes note of the report. We are concerned by the evidence presented of the continued militarization and cross-border involvement, including the conviction of soldiers for refusing deployment to the Democratic Republic of Congo, highlighting the risks such dynamic pose to regional security and to civilians. We are further concerned by protection gaps affecting refugees. The report notes discriminatory treatment, particularly against Banyamulenge, as well as arbitrary arrests of Congolese students. These patterns demand urgent safeguards consistent with international refugee law. We urge the Council to mandate an urgent review of reported Burundian operations in South Kivu linked to the persecution of Banyamulenge communities with immediate protection measures for civilians at risk. Mr. Vice President, we are alarmed by Burundi's documented rise in enforced disappearances and arbitrary detention. Mr. Special Rapporteur, to support progress and prevent regional spillover, what specific recommendations, including regional mechanisms on early warning indicators, protective presence, and reporting modalities, can you guide in order for us to have action and trigger timely protection when risks escalate? I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we note the efforts of Burundi in the area of human rights. The National Council for National Unity and Reconciliation, the Monitoring Center for the Prevention and Eradication of Genocide, War Crimes, and Crimes Against Humanity operate in the country. There's an independent National Human Rights Commission, the Office of the Ombudsman, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The Burundian authorities are actively engaged in dialogue with the relevant UN agencies, including OHCHR. We take a positive view of the efforts of Burundian authorities to prevent discrimination against national and religious minorities, and we note the measures to comply with legislatively enshrined ethnic quotas in state structures. The national penitentiary system is being improved, and the conditions of detention in place of detention are improving. The return of Burundian refugees is being facilitated. The steps taken by the country's leadership to maintain a dialogue with the opposition representatives of civil society deserve a positive assessment. Regular meetings are held with the population to discuss the different questions related to social economic development. All these measures deserve a positive response from the international community, which should abandon the practice of exerting pressure on Burundian authorities under human rights pretext. We're in favor of respect for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and non-interference in the internal affairs of this country. Thank you. Thank you. I give the floor to Belarus. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Belarus rejects country mandates that are imposed on countries without their consent. Unilateral actions undermine dialogue and limit opportunities for mutually reinforcing joint constructive efforts in the human rights system and the government in the field of human rights. We're convinced that only rejection of pressure, objectivity, and assessments, constructive dialogue, and support for national efforts in the field of human rights can contribute to real progress on the ground. We note the functioning of a number of national institutions in Burundi designed to promote human rights and stress the need to support them. We commend the efforts of the government of Burundi to protect and promote social and economic rights, despite the difficult context, as well as the authorities' focus on working with universal human rights mechanisms and foreign partners. Thank you.
Merci. La Suisse à la...
Thank you. I call on Switzerland. Vice President, Switzerland thanks the Special Rapporteur for presenting his report. We regret that the Special Rapporteur still hasn't had access to the country, despite the fact that Burundi has a standing invitation to special procedures since 2013. We remain concerned at the serious human rights violations that have occurred in recent months, notably cases of enforced disappearance, arbitrary detention, acts of torture, and extrajudicial killings, as have been mentioned in the Special Rapporteur's report. This comes against a backdrop of impunity and intimidation. We closely followed the elections on the 5th of June of this year. Whilst there was no major episodes of violence, we remain concerned at the constant shrinking of civic space, pressure on journalists, civil society, and political parties. Switzerland calls on the government to fully guarantee the rights to freedom of expression, peaceful assembly and associations. As a member of the Human Rights Council, the authorities should cooperate in a constructive fashion with the Special Rapporteur and with the High Commissioner for Human Rights and his regional office for Central Africa. Special Rapporteur, whilst there is a long electoral cycle underway, how can the international community help broaden civic space and contribute to the protection of human rights defenders, journalists, and civil society? Thank you very much. Thank you. Cameroon has the floor. Thank you, Vice President. Cameroon would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for presenting his report, and we endorse the statement delivered by the African Group. My delegation has taken note of the analysis and recommendations in the report, which highlights the persistent human rights challenges in Burundi, particularly in the context of the 2025 elections, the mass inflow of Congolese refugees and economic and social constraints, particularly affecting vulnerable groups. Cameroon congratulates the Burundian authorities on their dialogue with international and regional mechanisms, including the Special Rapporteur, with a view to creating the appropriate conditions for constructive cooperations. We welcome the recent visit of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, which is a strong sign from the Burundian government towards added engagement at an African level. My country underscores the importance of providing additional support based on dialogue and solidarity in order to support Burundi's efforts to build peace, strengthen the rule of law, and improve living conditions. Lastly, Cameroon reiterates its belief that it's only an inclusive approach which respects national sovereignty and is underpinned by international cooperation will allow the current achievements to be consolidated and lasting progress to be made in promoting and protecting human rights. Thank you. I now call on the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the Special Rapporteur for their latest update and continued efforts to monitor the human rights situation in Burundi. We urge the government of Burundi to allow him full access and to reopen the OHCHR country office. Mr. President, following the recent elections, we again welcome the non-violent and timely way in which they were conducted. However, we note with concern the serious irregularities reflected in this report, including voter intimidation, fraudulent registrations, shrinking civic space, and the suppression of opposition voices. We call on Burundi to protect the freedoms of expression, assembly, and association, including by revising legal frameworks that curtail media freedom. We further call on Burundi to ensure accountability for human rights violations via impartial investigations and judicial independence, especially with regard to arbitrary arrests and detentions and enforced disappearances. To the Special Rapporteur, we ask, how can the international community support Burundi to strengthen its democratic processes and to protect human rights, especially in the run-up to the 2027 elections?
Merci. Je passe.
Thank you. I call on China.
Mr. Vice President, China has taken note of the Special Rapporteur's report on the human rights situation in Burundi. We commend the active efforts of the Burundian government to maintain national stability and promote national reconciliation, as well as the progress in promoting and protecting human rights. The current peace and stability in Burundi are hard-won. China reiterates that the international community should continue respecting Burundi's sovereignty and independence, respect its efforts to independently resolve domestic issues, and play a positive role in helping Burundi achieve national stability and sustainable development. Regrettably, instead of playing a constructive role, some countries have disregarded repeated and clear requests from the Burundi government and several African countries for the Council to discontinue the mandate of the special procedures on Burundi. This constitutes an obstacle to Burundi's stability and development, also a significant waste of Human Rights Council's valuable resources, thus aggravating UN's liquidity crisis. We consistently oppose politicization of human rights, and we call on all parties to address human rights issues through constructive dialogue and cooperation, thus jointly to improve global human rights governance. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I call on Cuba. Thank you very much, Vice President. Cuba reiterates its vehement rejection of the imposition of punitive and selective mechanisms which don't warrant the consent of the concerned country. These practices violate the principles of respect for sovereignty, independence, and self-determination of peoples, which are enshrined in the United Nations Charter and international law. Mechanisms such as this one against Burundi do not produce results, and they are doomed to fail. They perpetuate confrontation and waste the resources of this body. The only effective way to promote human rights around the world is through dialogue and constructive cooperation based on mutual respect and non-interference in the internal affairs of states. The peoples of the world need less interference and more cooperation and solidarity. We reiterate our call to respect the principles of impartiality, objectivity, and non-selectivity. Thank you very much. Thank you. I call on the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Iran takes note the effort of the Burundian authorities in the area of human rights. The submission of the 11 to 19 periodic report of to the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination reflects as constructive willingness by Burundian authorities to engage with United Nations Treaty mechanism. We hold the view that the promotion and protection of human rights must be grounded in the principle of cooperation and sincere dialogue among states, fostering amicable international relations founded on the equal rights of peoples and the right to self-determination. Iran reaffirms its stance that country-specific initiatives within the Council that lack the consent of the concerned country are ineffective. We call upon the Council to adhere to the foundational principles of universality and non-selectivity as outlined in the General Assembly Resolution 60/251. Finally, we urge the Council to extend the necessary technical assistance and capacity building support to Burundi as requested to aid in advancing human rights promotion and protection efforts within the country. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. This was the last speaker on my list. We're now going to turn to the list of national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations. And I'd like to give the floor, first of all, to East and Horn of Africa Human Rights Defenders Project. Vice President, Special Rapporteur. This session is being held 10 years on from the Council's first meaningful response to the crisis which erupted in 2015, and it will be soon the 10th anniversary of the extraordinary session on Burundi. But 10 years on, the risk factors for atrocity crimes continue. Serious violations are being committed in all impunity. There are extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, amongst others. The National Human Rights Commission lacks independence. This is a smear on GANRI's reputation, the other NHRIs with an A rating. Burundi should be downgraded to B. UN experts have constantly raised the alarm about serious human rights violations, electoral violence, and civil society has raised the alarm that the ruling party does not want a peaceful transition through free elections. There are more concerns now than there were a year ago. We urge the Council to extend the mandate. There's no plot against Burundi. Many of the civil society actors have been living in exile for 10 years. We didn't choose this life, but we were forced to live abroad because of the instrumentalization of the judicial system against independent voices, as well as risks for our security. Mr. Zongo, you have our full support. How can Burundi's obligations as a council member be used to incite the authorities to resume cooperation with the council? Thank you. Thank you. I give the floor to Akat. Vice President Special Rapporteur, ACAT Burundi, FIACAT, SOS Torture Burundi, CCPR, and the OMCT, thank you for your report. Since the bloody crisis of 2015, causing over 1,200 deaths, 400 enforced disappearances, and which drove over 400,000 people into exile, there is still total impunity for very serious crimes. Last year, our organizations documented over 170 murders, 103 arbitrary arrests, mainly of political opponents, and 49 cases of torture and detention. This systematic repression is an attempt to stifle any dissident voices. Opposition parties had over 50 meetings broken up by the police. They live in permanent fear, and the situation grew worse in the run-up to the elections on the 5th of June. In order to illustrate these repressive trends, SOS Torture Burundi has set up an interactive map which helps you see the dynamics of repression and the most affected areas. This thus strengthens our independent and credible documentation. In view of this alarming situation and the ongoing human rights violations, we urge the Council to renew the mandate. Thank you.
Doctor.
Monsieur le Président,
Vice President, Special Rapporteur, since the 2015 crisis, Burundi has undertaken systematic repression of journalists and civil society members. They're the main targets of intimidation, arbitrary arrest, physical violence and threats. Despite the authorities' commitments, there is widespread climate of fear which prevents fundamental rights such as press and freedom of expression being exercised. Sandra Muhoza's case is eloquent. She was arbitrarily arrested on the 12th of April last year because she commented in what